The first thing I noticed was that my replacement was already standing outside my office while my boss was telling me I was being fired. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Evan Mercer was 26, wore expensive sneakers to work because his dad owned the company, and was standing 3 feet from my glass door holding a cardboard box like he'd been waiting for someone to tell him when to move in. Inside the conference room, our HR manager had placed a folder in front of me and folded her hands on top of it. My boss, Richard Mercer, wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the folder like it contained something unpleasant he'd already decided he didn't want to discuss. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately," Denise said. She had worked in HR for 11 years and had the particular talent of making catastrophic sentences sound like routine scheduling changes. "The company has determined that you accessed and removed confidential business information without authorization." I actually laughed, not because it was funny. I think my brain just didn't know what else to do. "What information?" I asked. Richard finally looked up. "You know what information?" That was the moment I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding would have looked different. There would have been questions. Somebody would have shown me a file and asked why my credentials appeared on it. Somebody would have said, "Help us understand what happened." Instead, there was a folder, an HR manager, my boss, and his son waiting outside my office with a box. "No," I said. "I genuinely don't know what you're talking about." Denise slid a printed document across the table. We reviewed the access records. I looked down at it. There were dates, times, file names, and my employee ID. Some of the files were familiar, some weren't. One was a client pricing workbook I'd worked on months earlier. Another was an internal forecast. Another was a contract summary. Then I saw the date at the top of the first page and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "This is last Thursday." Richard nodded. "Correct. I was at the Cleveland client site last Thursday." "You were. My laptop was with me. Your credentials reused. Then someone used my credentials." Richard leaned back. "That's the problem, Jake. You're the only person authorized to use them." His voice wasn't angry. That made it worse. If he'd been shouting, I could have convinced myself this was some emotional reaction. Instead, he sounded like a man reading a decision he'd made 3 days ago. "I didn't take anything," I said. Denise looked at me with what might have been sympathy, although I couldn't tell anymore. "You don't need to admit anything today." "I'm not admitting anything because I didn't do it." Richard exhaled slowly. "We're not going to argue about this. Then investigate it." "We did." "No, you looked at an access log." He frowned. "That's not the same thing. I know exactly how our access system works." I pointed at the paper. "These timestamps are login events, not proof that I opened every file listed here." Richard's expression changed for half a second. It was tiny, but I'd spent 8 years learning his face. "You've already decided," I said. He didn't answer. Denise did. "The decision has been made." I looked through the glass wall again. Evan was still standing there. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. He was looking at my office. There was something almost uncomfortable in his expression. Not guilt, more like impatience. I looked back at Richard. "When did you decide Evan was taking my position?" Neither of them answered. That silence told me more than the termination letter did. Richard eventually said, "This isn't about Evan. He's holding a box. He'll be assuming some of your responsibilities." "My responsibilities?" I said. "You just fired me." Richard's jaw tightened. "We're done here." I stood up. My chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Denise pushed the termination packet toward me. "You can review the paperwork at home." "I'm supposed to take this home?" "Yes. And I'm supposed to explain to every future employer that I was fired for stealing confidential information?" Denise didn't answer. Richard looked at the table. "We'll provide a neutral employment verification." I stared at him. 8 years. 8 years of working weekends, answering calls during vacations, fixing mistakes that weren't mine. Driving 6 hours through snow because a customer shipment was stuck, training people who later became supervisors. Staying late because a contract had changed at the last minute, and somehow I was leaving with a sentence that could follow me for the rest of my career. I took the folder. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I expected anger. I expected panic. Instead, I felt strangely calm. "One question," I said. Richard looked up. "Why did you wait until today?" His eyes moved toward Denise. "What do you mean? If you had access records from last Thursday, why didn't anyone call me Friday, or Monday, or Tuesday?" "It was Wednesday morning." He paused. "We needed time to review the matter. 3 business days." "Yes. And during those 3 days, you decided Evan would replace me." "Jake, when did he know?" Richard's face hardened. "Enough. I looked through the glass again. Evan looked away. That was the second thing I noticed. The first was the box. The second was that he already knew. I walked out without shaking anyone's hand. Denise said, "I'm sorry this happened." I didn't respond. Richard stayed seated. Evan moved aside when I approached my office. He didn't say anything. I opened the door and looked around. There were 8 years of my life in that room. A coffee mug from a client in Cincinnati. A framed photograph from our warehouse expansion project. 3 notebooks stacked beside my monitor. A little plastic baseball someone had given me after a charity softball game. A whiteboard covered with numbers that suddenly belonged to somebody else. Evan stepped inside. "I can pack this up for you." I looked at him. "You can? Your personal stuff. Don't touch anything on the desk." He raised his hands. "Okay." I unplugged my phone charger, took the photo, grabbed my notebook, and opened the bottom drawer. There was a spare tie, 2 granola bars, a phone battery, and an old pair of work gloves. I put them in a box. Evan stood near the door. "Jake." I looked at him. He hesitated. "I didn't know this was going to happen like this." "But you knew it was going to happen." He didn't answer. "Did your dad tell you yesterday?" I asked. "I can't talk about that. That's an answer." He looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry." I believed him. That was the worst part. I genuinely believed that he was sorry. He wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't some evil genius who had spent months plotting my downfall. He was a young guy who wanted his father's approval and had just been handed a position he wasn't remotely ready for. At that moment, I still didn't know how much damage he was going to cause. I walked past him carrying the box. No one stopped me at reception. The security guard looked surprised when I handed him my badge. "Everything okay, Jake?" he asked. I almost told him. Instead, I said, "Not really." He glanced at the badge and then at me. "They walking you out?" "Looks that way." He lowered his voice. "Man, I'm sorry." I nodded and kept walking. My car was exactly where I'd left it. I put the box in the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For the first time in 8 years, there was nowhere I needed to be. I stared through the windshield at the building where I'd spent more waking hours than anywhere except my apartment. Mercer Industrial Logistics occupied a low gray building outside Columbus, Ohio, surrounded by loading docks, a maintenance yard, and enough company vehicles to make the parking lot look like a dealership. We weren't a giant corporation, about 240 employees across 3 states. We handled logistics and contract operations for manufacturers that didn't want to manage their own regional distribution. My department dealt with the accounts that were too complicated to hand to somebody straight out of college. Medical equipment, automotive components, industrial parts, temperature-sensitive materials. If a shipment was late, expensive, complicated, or likely to become someone's problem at 2,000 meters, it usually ended up on my screen. I had started there at 21, making barely enough to feel independent. My first job title had been operations coordinator. Most people thought that meant answering emails. In reality, it meant being the person everybody called when 3 trucks were in Pennsylvania, a customer in Michigan was threatening a penalty, a warehouse had mislabeled 20 pallets, and the night supervisor had gone home sick. I learned fast. By 24, I was managing major accounts. By 27, I was a senior operations manager. 6 months before I was fired, Richard had made me director of strategic operations. The title sounded more impressive than the job felt. Mostly it meant more responsibility and more people calling me when something went wrong. I had never been the loudest person in the room. I wasn't particularly charismatic. I wasn't the guy who dominated meetings or stayed late just so people could see him staying late. My value was simpler. If you gave me a broken process, I could usually figure out where it was leaking money. If a client complained, I knew which warehouse manager to call. If a contract had a weird clause buried on page 43, I remembered it 6 months later when somebody tried to charge us for something they weren't supposed to. That had always been enough. I started the engine and drove home. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call my girlfriend because I didn't have one anymore. My last relationship had ended 8 months earlier, partly because I'd been working too much, and partly because I was 29 and still behaving like the company might collapse if I took a weekend off. My younger sister Megan lived in Indianapolis. My parents were in northern Ohio. I had a mortgage on a small townhouse and enough savings to survive for a while, but not forever. I'd also spent the last year telling myself I was finally financially stable. That afternoon, I opened my banking app 3 times without really seeing the numbers. The termination packet sat on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it again. Instead, I went through the first 40 minutes of my day in my head. The meeting had been scheduled at 900. I had received the invitation at 8:14. The subject line was Operational Review. At 8:47, Denise had sent another message asking me to bring my laptop. I hadn't thought anything of it. Then I remembered something that hadn't bothered me until now. At 8:39, Evan had walked past my office. He'd never done that before. At 8:42, Richard had called me and said, "Don't worry about the client meeting this afternoon. We'll reschedule." I'd assumed he was helping me prepare for the review. Now it sounded different. I opened the termination paperwork. The accusation was written in careful corporate language. I had allegedly removed, retained, and potentially disclosed confidential operational and commercial information without authorization. There was no allegation of selling it, no allegation naming a competitor, just enough ambiguity to make me sound dangerous without requiring them to prove a specific crime. I read the phrase twice. Potentially disclosed. That was deliberate. They didn't have to say I sold anything. They just had to make future employers wonder. I went to my computer and started making a timeline. I didn't have access to company systems anymore, and I wasn't going to try. I wrote down everything I could remember from the previous 2 weeks. Meetings, calls, emails, client visits, travel, people I'd spoken to, documents I'd worked on. At 4:17 p.m., I stopped. There was something odd. The files they listed had all been associated with the Atlas account. Atlas was a large manufacturing client we'd been trying to renew for almost 6 months. Their contract was worth millions annually and had been under internal pressure because the renewal terms were getting worse. I'd been one of the people negotiating the operational side. I'd also spent the previous months pushing back on a proposal from finance that I thought was too aggressive. I didn't think much of that at the time. Finance had wanted to recognize some expected revenue before Atlas had formally approved the expansion. I had objected because the operational capacity didn't exist yet. Richard had told me, "We're not booking anything that isn't defensible." I had accepted that answer. Maybe I shouldn't have. I wrote Atlas at the top of the page, and underneath it wrote 3 names: Richard Mercer, Evan Mercer, and Colin Wade, our CFO. Then I stopped. Colin had never given me a reason to distrust him. Richard had spent years building the company. Evan was inexperienced, but not stupid. There had to be another explanation. The next morning, I called an employment attorney. Not because I planned to sue immediately, but because I needed to know what I was dealing with. The attorney, Laura Bennett, was recommended by a former coworker. She listened for almost an hour and then said something I didn't like. "Don't contact the company. I need my belongings. Have them send them. What about the accusation? Don't send a long defense email." Why? Because right now, you don't know what they actually have. That sentence stuck with me. I told her about the access logs. She asked whether I had signed any agreements regarding confidential information. I had. She asked whether I had copied anything to personal devices. I told her no. She asked whether I had ever emailed work documents to my personal account. I thought about it. Not intentionally. She raised an eyebrow. That's not the same answer. There may be old emails with attachments, travel receipts, meeting notes, stuff like that. That's normal. Don't delete anything. I asked what I should do. Preserve everything you legally possess. Don't access anything you don't. Don't contact former coworkers asking them to violate company policy. Don't threaten anyone. Don't post about it publicly. And don't let anger make decisions for you. I almost laughed. I don't feel angry. You will. She was right. It arrived that evening when my old coworker Sam called me. Sam had been with Mercer for 6 years. We had started around the same time, survived 2 warehouse expansions, and once spent 16 hours in a parking lot during a winter storm because 3 trucks couldn't get through. He said, "Man, I heard already." "Yeah." "What are they saying?" Silence. "Sam, they're saying you took some Atlas files. Did you believe them?" Another pause. "I don't know. That hurt more than I expected. You know me." "I know you. Then you know I wouldn't do that." "I do. But there are access logs, Jake." I closed my eyes. "You've seen them?" "No." "Then how do you know?" "Then how do you know?" Because that's what Richard told people. There it was. Richard had already started controlling the story. Who else knows? I asked. Pretty much everyone. That fast, they had a meeting this morning. About me? They called it a security briefing. I laughed once. Of course they did. Sam lowered his voice. "Evan's taking over Atlas." "I didn't say anything." "Jake, I'm here. I don't think you did it." "You don't sound like you believe that." "I do. I just don't know what happened. Neither do I." We were quiet for a few seconds. Then Sam said, "I'm sorry. Thanks. Are you going to fight it? I don't know yet. If you need anything. He stopped. Actually, I probably shouldn't say that. Why? Richard told us not to discuss the investigation. There is no investigation. Apparently there is. After we hung up, I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. The company had already moved faster than I had. They had a story. I had a termination letter. They had a security briefing. I had a notebook. They had Evan sitting in my office. I had a box of personal belongings. For the next week, I focused on survival. I applied for jobs. The first 3 applications went nowhere. One recruiter asked why I left Mercer. I said there had been a disagreement about my employment. She asked whether I was terminated. I said yes. She said she'd call me back. She didn't. Another recruiter asked for a reference from Richard. I said I could provide other managers. That ended the conversation. I started hearing my own reputation in the silence between phone calls. Maybe I'd been naive about how quickly 8 years could disappear. My father called on Saturday. Your mother said you lost your job. Yeah. What happened? They accused me of taking confidential information. He went quiet. Did you? No. Then why would they say that? I don't know. Could this be some kind of misunderstanding? Maybe. I didn't tell him about Evan. Not yet. He asked if I needed money. I said no. He offered anyway. I refused. That night, I opened an old external hard drive I had used for personal backups. I found photographs from work events, old resumes, tax documents, and a folder labeled Mercer Personal. Inside were copies of my performance reviews. I hadn't thought about them in years. I opened the oldest one. My first supervisor had written that I was dependable under pressure, but sometimes too reluctant to challenge senior management. I smiled at that. It was probably the most accurate sentence anyone had ever written about me. 8 years later, I still had the same problem. I believed if I did my job well enough, I wouldn't have to fight people. The next review was from Richard. Jake has become one of the most reliable operators in the organization. The year after that, strong judgment, excellent client instincts. Then, ready for greater responsibility. I kept reading. In my most recent review, Richard had written, Jake's institutional knowledge is a major asset to the company. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Institutional knowledge. That was exactly what made the accusation strange. If I had wanted confidential information, I already knew most of it. Not everything, obviously. But I knew the systems. I knew the contracts. I knew the operational history. I knew which numbers were real and which numbers existed because someone needed them to look good in a meeting. I knew which clients were unhappy and which ones were pretending to be. I knew how long projects actually took. I knew where the company was bleeding money. And then I remembered something else. 3 weeks before I was fired, Richard had asked me a question that had seemed harmless at the time. If you were leaving tomorrow, what would be the one thing nobody else here could pick up? I'd laughed. Probably Atlas. Why? Because half the operational history isn't in the system. Where is it? My head. He had smiled. That's what worries me. I'd laughed because I thought he was joking. Now I wasn't sure. On Monday morning, I called Sam again. He didn't answer. I sent a text. Nothing. Tuesday. Still nothing. Wednesday, he finally replied. Can't talk. That was unusual enough that I stopped what I was doing. I didn't push him. Later that afternoon, I received an email from another former coworker, Melissa Grant. Melissa had worked in contract administration. She had never been particularly close to me. We had disagreed plenty of times, usually over deadlines. Her email contained 4 words. You need to check Atlas. No attachment. No explanation. I called her immediately. She didn't answer. I replied, what about it? 20 minutes later, she wrote back, I can't discuss company information. But look at the dates. I asked, which dates? She didn't respond. I opened my notebook. Atlas. The renewal had been scheduled for October 31st. The internal expansion forecast had been dated October 12th. The files listed in my termination notice had been accessed October 17th. I stared at the dates. Something didn't fit. I had been in Cleveland on October 17th. My travel itinerary was in my email. I had flown out on the morning of October 16th, stayed overnight, and returned late on the 17th. The access records supposedly showed my credentials opening files at 20:14 p.m. and 2:31 p.m. on October 17th. I had been in a client conference room at 2 Tumber. That didn't prove anything. My credentials could have been used elsewhere, but there was something else. The company required a secondary authentication code for remote access. I couldn't remember the last time I'd entered one. I checked my personal email for travel confirmations. Then I remembered that Mercer used a remote access system that required an authenticator application. My phone had been with me in Cleveland. If someone had used my credentials remotely, they'd need more than my password, unless they were already inside the network, or unless the access logs weren't showing what Richard claimed they showed. I called Laura. She told me not to speculate. You need evidence, Jake. I know. And you need to stay out of their systems. I haven't touched anything. Good. Can I look at my own email? Personal email? Yes. Absolutely. Work email? No. Even if I still have copies, don't access the company account. I hung up and started looking at everything I legitimately had. My calendar, my travel receipts, personal copies of performance reviews, text messages, photos, old project notes I had printed for meetings. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first useful thing came from a photograph. I had taken a picture at the Cleveland client site because the customer had put a ridiculous motivational poster behind the conference table and Sam had joked about it. The photo was timestamped 2018 p.m. on October 17. In the background, reflected faintly in the glass, were 3 people sitting around the table. Me, Atlas's operations director, and a Mercer account executive named Daniel Ruiz. The photograph didn't prove I hadn't accessed company files, but it placed me physically in Cleveland at the exact time one of the access events supposedly occurred. More importantly, I remember the meeting. My laptop had been connected to the client's guest network. Mercer didn't allow our internal file system to be accessed from that network without VPN. The VPN required 2-factor authentication. I had not logged into it during the meeting because we were reviewing printed documents. I couldn't prove that yet, but I could remember one thing with absolute certainty. My phone had been sitting on the table the entire time because the Atlas director had asked me to silence it after it rang during the opening presentation. I had no idea whether that mattered. The next morning, Melissa called me. I can give you 5 minutes, she said. I'm listening. The Atlas renewal numbers were changed before you were fired. What numbers? Projected volume. Who changed them? I don't know. Melissa. I genuinely don't. Why tell me? She took a breath. Because after you left, Evan asked me where the old capacity model was. The one I built? Yes. What did you tell him? That it was in the shared operations folder. And he said it wasn't. It was. I know. What? It was. I know. What happened? He asked me to recreate it. That bothered me. Why? Because he didn't understand the original model. I rubbed my forehead. Melissa, what does that have to do with my firing? The old model showed Atlas couldn't support the expansion they were announcing. I sat up. What expansion? The one they told the board was already operationally approved. My stomach tightened. Atlas expansion wasn't approved. Not by operations. Not by operations. Who approved it? I don't know. Melissa. Jake, I'm serious. I don't know. I'm already taking enough risk talking to you. Then why are you talking to me? She was quiet. Because I was the person who entered the revised contract figures. When? When? October 15th. Before the files were accessed. Yes. Who told you to? Colin. Colin Wade. CFO. What did he say? He said the client had verbally approved the expansion. Did they? I asked for confirmation. And? He said not to slow down the process. I wrote everything down. What changed? Projected annual revenue. How much? I don't remember exactly. Ballpark. She hesitated. A few million. I stopped writing. Melissa, that matters. I know. Did Richard know? He was copied on the email. Do you have the email? Silence. Melissa? Alyssa, I shouldn't have told you this. You already did. I have to go. Wait. She hung up. I sat there looking at my notes. The accusation had been about confidential information. The files were Atlas related. Atlas had a major expansion forecast. Finance had changed the numbers before the supposed unauthorized access, and my replacement had been installed immediately after I was removed. It was still circumstantial. It could all have been unrelated. But then I remembered the question Richard had asked me about what nobody else could pick up. He hadn't been joking. He had been measuring how much I knew. The next week, I found another job lead. A competitor called Northline Distribution wanted someone with my experience. Their operations VP, Karen Shaw, interviewed me over Zoom. She was straightforward. Why did you leave Mercer? I was terminated. She paused. For? They accused me of taking confidential information. She leaned back. Did you? No. Can you prove that? I'm working on it. She didn't smile. That's not usually the answer candidates give. It's the honest one. Were you under investigation? The company said they investigated. I wasn't given enough information to meaningfully respond. She nodded. Would Mercer rehire you? No. Would Richard give you a positive reference? Probably not. Would you give me permission to contact him? No. That answer ended the interview, but Karen surprised me. For what it's worth, she said, your resume is very strong. Thanks. I'm not offering you the job. I figured, but I'm not rejecting you either. 3 days later, she called again. She asked me detailed questions about contract operations, warehouse utilization, client retention, and cost leakage. She didn't ask about the accusation. At the end, she said, I want to make you an offer, but I need to know whether your legal situation is going to become our problem. I told her the truth. I don't know. She said she'd think about it. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt since the firing. Hope. Then, that same afternoon, I received a letter from a law firm representing Mercer Industrial Logistics. It accused me of retaining confidential information and demanded that I confirm destruction of all company documents in my possession. I called Laura. She read the letter and said, they're trying to create a record. What kind? One where they can say they warned you. I don't have company documents. Do you have anything that belongs to them? Not intentionally. Let's make a list. We spent an hour cataloging everything I had, printed meeting agendas, performance reviews, a few old project spreadsheets I'd emailed to myself years ago because I had been working remotely during a storm. Laura told me to preserve them and let her handle the response. 2 days later, Northline withdrew the offer. Karen called me personally. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's not. I understand. Their attorney contacted ours. I closed my eyes. They did? They said you were involved in a confidential information matter. Were you given evidence? No. Did you believe them? She hesitated. I believe there's more to this than you're telling me. There is. I just don't know all of it yet. That's what worries me. After we hung up, I sat in my car outside a grocery store for 20 minutes. I had gone in for coffee. I never went inside. That was when I finally let myself feel angry. Not loud anger. Not throwing things. Just the realization that they had managed to make me unemployable before I'd even had a chance to explain myself. They weren't just firing me. They were controlling what happened after I left. That changed the nature of the problem. I stopped thinking about getting my job back. I started thinking about proving exactly what they had done. I called Laura. I want to investigate this. You can investigate your own situation. I want to know why they framed me. Careful with that word. Why they accused me. Better. And I want to know what's happening with Atlas. She was silent. Why? Because that's where the files are. You can look at publicly available information. That's it? For now. So I did. I spent evenings searching public records, industry reports, company announcements, state filings, client press releases, anything that could connect Atlas's expansion to Mercer's financial reporting. I found a small announcement on Atlas's website dated October 22. It said Atlas had expanded its partnership with select regional logistics providers. Mercer wasn't named, but the timing bothered me. The company had been telling employees the expansion was essentially approved before Atlas publicly announced anything. I found another clue in a public procurement document. Atlas had not finalized the expansion contract until October 28. That was 3 days before the renewal date. Yet Mercer had apparently recognized millions in projected revenue on October 15. I called Laura. I think I found something. What? Atlas didn't finalize the expansion until October 28. Okay. Mercer changed the revenue projections October 15. Where did you get that? Melissa told me. Can she testify? I don't know. Don't contact her again about company information. Why? Because if she's still employed, you don't want to put her in a position where they can accuse her of giving you confidential material. I understood. So what do I do? Document what you already know. And wait? Yes. Waiting was the hardest part. Then something unexpected happened. Evan called me. His number appeared on my screen at 9:43 p.m. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Jake? Yeah. He sounded tired. Can we talk? About what? Work. You mean your job. I mean the account. Which account? Atlas. I sat down. Go ahead. He was quiet. Atlas. I sat down. Go ahead. He was quiet for several seconds. Dad says you left behind some files. I didn't leave files. I left everything in the company system. Right. What do you need? The old capacity model. I laughed softly. Melissa told you where it was. It's not there. It is. I checked. Then you don't know how it's organized. He exhaled. Can you tell me? No. Why not? Because I don't work there. I know. Another silence. Evan, why are you calling me? Because I don't understand some of the numbers. That's not my problem. I know. Then ask finance. Finance says the numbers are correct. Something in his voice changed when he said that. Not confidence. Fear. What numbers? I asked. The Atlas forecast. What's wrong with it? The warehouse capacity doesn't match. I didn't answer. Jake? How much doesn't it match? A lot. Then don't sign anything. He went quiet. What? I asked. Nothing. He went oliest. Nothing? Evan, I have a meeting tomorrow. With who? Dad, Colin, Atlas. What are they expecting you to approve? I don't know. Then don't approve anything. He sounded almost offended. I'm not an idiot. I didn't say you were. You think I can't do your job. I think you haven't had time to learn it. I've been here 2 years. You've been here 2 years in sales. He didn't respond. Evan, if the capacity numbers don't work, that's not something you fix by changing the spreadsheet. I know. Then why are you asking me? Because you're the only person who understood the whole thing. That sentence stayed with me after we hung up. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I didn't call Evan back. I called Laura instead. I told her exactly what he'd said. She asked me to write down the conversation while it was fresh. I did. Then she said, don't contact him again unless he contacts you. Okay? And Jake, yeah? You need to be prepared for the possibility that this is much bigger than your termination. I looked at the notebook beside my bed. Atlas. October 15th. October 17th. October 28th. Richard. Colin. Evan. I think it is, I said. That afternoon, Melissa sent me another message. Just one sentence. I found the email. I stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. What email? Her answer came immediately. The one where Colin told me to change the Atlas revenue numbers. I didn't ask her to forward it. I knew better. Instead, I wrote, don't send me anything you aren't allowed to send. She replied, I know. Then another message appeared. But I need you to understand something. What? The email wasn't the worst part. I waited. What was? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then her message came through. The attachment was a forecast you created 3 months ago. I felt the room go completely still. What forecast? I wrote. She answered. The one that showed Atlas couldn't support the expansion without another warehouse. I went back to my old files and searched my personal backups. I didn't have the forecast itself, but I had a presentation I'd made for Richard in July. It showed projected capacity through the following year. The numbers were conservative. They weren't supposed to go outside the company. I had never emailed it to myself. I had printed it for a meeting. But the memory was enough. The forecast showed exactly what Melissa was describing. Atlas could expand, but only if Mercer leased additional warehouse space and hired more drivers. That would cost millions before the revenue appeared. The internal forecast finance had created ignored those costs. Suddenly, the accusation made more sense. If I had discovered the difference between the operational forecast and the financial forecast, I could have challenged the numbers. Worse, I had been the person responsible for explaining those numbers to Atlas. If Atlas asked why the expansion couldn't start on the promised timeline, I would have known immediately. I had not been fired because I was inconvenient. I might have been fired because I was a witness. I didn't know that yet. I only knew one thing for certain. Someone had been very careful to make it look like I had stolen the information they were afraid I knew. I closed the notebook. For the first time since Richard had placed the termination folder in front of me, I wasn't trying to figure out how to get my old life back. I was trying to figure out what my old company was so afraid I'd discover. When my phone rang at 7:12 the next morning. And for a second, I thought it might be Melissa calling to tell me she changed her mind. It wasn't Melissa. It was Daniel Ruiz, the Mercer account executive, who had been sitting across from me in that Cleveland conference room on October 17th. I hadn't spoken to him since I was fired. His name on my screen made me sit up straight. Daniel? There was a pause before he answered. Hey, Jake. His voice was lower than usual. You got a minute? Yeah, I'm calling for my car. Okay. I don't want to talk about anything confidential. Then why are you calling? Another pause. Because I think I owe you an apology. I leaned against the kitchen counter. For what? For not saying anything when they fired you. I didn't answer. I should have said something, he continued. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew the timing was weird. What did you know? Not enough. Daniel. I know. He sighed. You remember the Cleveland meeting? Yes. The one on the 17th? Yes. The one on the 17th? Yes. They asked me to confirm something about that meeting yesterday. My grip tightened around the phone. Who asked? Mercer's outside counsel. What did they ask? Whether you had access to your laptop during the meeting. What did you say? I said yes? My heart dropped. You did? You did have your laptop. But I didn't use the VPN. I know. How do you know? He hesitated. Because I was sitting next to you. So why did they ask? That's what I'm trying to tell you. He took a breath. They weren't really asking whether you used it. They were asking whether you could have. I walked to the window. What exactly did you tell them? That you had your laptop with you. Anything else? That you were in the conference room from around 1:50 until after 3. I closed my eyes. Did they ask about the photograph? What photograph? Never mind. Jake, what is going on? I don't know yet. I think you do. No. I think you do. No. I think I know where to look. He was quiet. There's something else, he said. Go ahead. The day before your termination, Richard asked me to send him the Cleveland meeting notes. Why? Said he needed them for the Atlas renewal. Did you? Yes. What did you send? The notes from the meeting. Anything else? The revised pricing sheet. My stomach tightened. Which revised pricing sheet? The one we discussed in Cleveland. Daniel, that sheet didn't exist until the 18th. Silence. What? The revision date was October 18. No. I sent Richard the version we had. What date was on it? October 16. I grabbed my notebook. Are you sure? Pretty sure. Can you check your sent email? I can. Don't forward anything to me. Why? Because I don't want you risking your job. Jake, I already know they're watching me. That sentence made me stop. What do you mean? Someone from IT asked me about a call I had with you. When? 2 days ago. After I called you? Yeah. What did you tell them? That we talked about the Cleveland meeting. Did they ask if I contacted you? Yes. And? I said no. I frowned. Why lie? Because I didn't want them asking why you called. But I did call you. I know. Daniel, if they're monitoring who talks to me, that's important. That's why I'm telling you. We stayed silent for a moment. I need to go, he said. Daniel. Yeah? Yeah. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. He hung up. I wrote down the call. Then I wrote one sentence beneath it. They are trying to establish that I could have accessed the files from Cleveland. That was different from proving I did. The distinction mattered. I called Laura. She listened, asked a few questions, and told me not to contact Daniel again unless he reached out. They're building a record, she said. I know. And they're probably trying to make witnesses uncomfortable. Can they legally monitor employees like that? Depends on the systems and policies. But don't assume anything. Daniel said IT asked about our call. Did he tell you what they asked? Yes. Write it down. Exact words if he remembers. I did. Laura? Yeah? Yeah? What if the access logs really show my credentials? Then we need to know how the system records authentication. I know how it works generally. You need someone independent to explain it. I know someone. Who? Former IT manager. He left 2 years ago. If he's willing to speak with you, that's fine. Just don't ask him to access anything. I called him that afternoon. His name was Mike Holloway. Mike had been with Mercer for almost 15 years before leaving to work for a healthcare company. He answered on the third ring. Jake. Hey Mike, I heard. I smiled bitterly. News travels. What happened? They say I accessed confidential files and took them. Did you? No. Then I'm guessing there's a technical problem. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Mike was quiet. Tell me what you know. I explained the access logs without sending him anything. He asked what the system was called, whether remote access was involved, and whether Mercer had recently changed authentication systems. I told him what I knew. If your credentials were used remotely, the logs should show an authentication event, he said. Not necessarily the same thing as a file access. That's what I thought. But there's another possibility. What? A service account or privileged administrator could potentially make it look like a user's session, depending on how the system is configured. Would that be visible? To someone who knows where to look. Could a normal HR person tell? No. Could IT? Absolutely. I stared at my notes. Mike, if someone wanted to make it look like I accessed files, could they do it? Technically, in some systems, yes. Would that be easy? No. Would they need access? Yes. Who would have that kind of access? He laughed without humor. That's the wrong question. Why? You should ask who had the ability to approve access and who had the ability to review logs. I wrote that down. Those might be different people. Exactly. Could someone alter the records? Again, technically possible. But don't assume that's what happened. I'm not. Jake, whatever you're doing, don't become obsessed with the technical angle. If this is corporate misconduct, the boring paperwork is probably more important than the computer logs. I smiled. That's something I'd say. That's because you're a logistics guy. Former logistics guy. Not yet. What do you mean? You don't lose 8 years of experience because someone fires you. That was the first genuinely encouraging thing anyone had said to me in weeks. I thanked him and hung up. Over the next few days, I stopped looking at the accusation as one event. I started treating it like a chain. If someone wanted me gone, they had needed 3 things: a reason, a story, and a replacement. The replacement was Evan. The story was the confidential information accusation. The reason was still unclear. Atlas was the strongest connection I'd found. I needed to know whether the numbers Melissa mentioned were actually significant enough to justify something this elaborate. I started looking at Mercer's public financial information. The company was privately held, so there wasn't much, but it had to file certain state records and had lenders. I found a business financing document that mentioned debt covenanters tied to revenue and operating performance. I didn't understand every detail, but one number caught my attention. Mercer needed to maintain a certain operating ratio. If projected revenue dropped significantly, the company could face problems with its lender. I compared that to the Atlas expansion. The projected revenue Colin had reportedly entered could make the company's numbers look much healthier, but the cost of actually servicing the expansion wouldn't hit immediately. That meant the company could appear stronger on paper before the expenses arrived. It wasn't automatically fraud. Companies make forecasts all the time, but if they represented expected revenue as committed revenue, that could become a serious accounting problem. I didn't know whether they had crossed that line. I needed more. Melissa called again on Friday evening. I need to tell you something. Okay, I quit. I sat down. What? I gave notice. Why? Because I couldn't keep doing it. Doing what? Entering numbers I knew weren't operationally supported. Melissa, did you tell anyone? I told Colin I wasn't comfortable. What did he say? He told me everyone was uncomfortable until the quarter closed. That's not an answer. I know. Did Richard know? Yes. How do you know? He was in the room. When? When? The Monday before you were fired. Where? Conference room B. Who else? Conference room B. Who else? Colin, Richard, Evan. I went still. Evan was there? Yes. What was discussed? Atlas. What about it? They were talking about the capacity problem. The real capacity problem? Yes. What did Evan say? He said you were the only person who would object. I stared at the wall. He said that. Not exactly. What exactly? He said, Jake's going to kill this if he sees the numbers. My chest tightened. What did Richard say? He said, Jake won't be seeing anything after this week. I didn't speak. Melissa continued. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. And now I do. I asked her if she had written any of this down. She said she had notes from the meeting. Where are they? At home. Don't send them to me. I know. Keep them. I'm trying. Melissa, did you talk to anyone else? No. Good. Jake? Yeah? I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. I should have told you before they fired you. I should have told you before they fired you. Why didn't you? She hesitated. Because I was scared. That was the most honest answer I'd heard from anyone at Mercer. I understand, I said. Do you? Yeah. I don't think I would have been brave enough either. She laughed quietly. You probably would have confronted them. No, I would have asked for a meeting and convinced myself I could solve it. That's why they were scared of you. I don't think so. You don't realize how much people depended on you. I thought about that. Apparently not. There's another thing. What? The day you were fired, Evan had already been given a new employment agreement. I frowned. How do you know? Contract admin processed it. Effective date? October 20. I checked the date on my termination letter. October 20, the day I was fired. Yes. And his title? Director of Strategic Operations. My mouth went dry. The title was mine. Salary? She hesitated. More than yours? I laughed once. Of course. Jake, I really have to go. Okay, if you need me to confirm what I told you, I will. Don't promise that yet. Why? Because you need to protect yourself. I know. Get an attorney if you can. I can't afford one. I might know someone. She said goodbye. I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour without moving. The replacement hadn't been improvised after my firing. His employment agreement had been prepared in advance. That didn't necessarily prove the firing was planned, but it made the timing impossible to ignore. I called Laura. She was quiet when I told her, "Do you have evidence?" "Melissa knows." "That's not evidence you possess." "She has notes." "Good. Tell her to preserve them." She quit. Then she has more freedom, but she still needs counsel. I'm starting to think that this was planned. I think you're right to suspect that. What if they planned the accusation? Then we need to establish who knew what and when. How? Dates. She paused. You keep saying dates. That's good. Dates are harder to argue with than motives. I opened my notebook. What should I track? Everything. Your termination meeting, Evan's employment agreement, the Atlas contract, the revised revenue forecast, any public announcements, any conversations witnesses are willing to document, and anything that shows the company knew about the capacity problem before they accused you. I wrote until my hand hurt. Over the following 2 weeks, my life became strangely divided. During the day, I applied for jobs and tried to appear normal. At night, I reconstructed 8 years of corporate history from memory and documents I legally possessed. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun. I was looking for contradictions. One contradiction became important. In my termination meeting, Richard had said the company discovered the unauthorized access during a review triggered by a routine security concern. But according to a message I received from Daniel, outside counsel had already been asking about the Cleveland meeting before my termination. That meant someone had started investigating the access before I was officially confronted. Why? I asked Daniel. He didn't respond for 2 days. Then he called. I got laid off. I stood up. What? Yesterday. Why? They said Restar. Why? They said restructuring. Daniel? I know. Did they ask about our conversation again? No. Did they take your laptop? Yes. Anything else? They disabled my access while I was in the parking lot. What did they tell you? Nothing. I felt sick. Daniel, did they give you a severance agreement? Yeah. Don't sign anything before talking to a lawyer. I figured. Did they mention me? Not officially. What does that mean? The letter says there are no allegations against me. But my manager said my position had become unnecessary, and Atlas, silence, Daniel, the Atlas account is moving forward. How? They've got a new plan. Evan's plan. I don't know. Do you know whether Atlas signed? I heard they did. That made no sense. The capacity problem hadn't disappeared, unless Mercer had found another warehouse. I asked where. Daniel said he didn't know. After we hung up, I searched property records. Mercer had not leased a new warehouse in the area. I checked trucking job postings. No significant increase. I checked public announcements. Nothing. The expansion was supposedly moving forward without the resources required to support it. That was when I realized the problem wasn't only what Mercer had told its own people. It was what they were telling Atlas. If the client had signed based on a promise Mercer couldn't fulfill, the operational fallout was coming. The question was, when? I called Karen at Northline. She didn't answer. I left a message asking whether the position was still open. She called back the next morning. I can't hire you right now, she said. I figured, but I want to tell you something. Okay, your situation has gotten around. In what way? People in our industry talk. What are they saying? That you were terminated for mishandling confidential information. Anything else? That you might have taken client data to a competitor. I laughed bitterly. I don't work for a competitor. I know. Who is telling people that? I don't know. Do you believe it? No. Why? Because I know your work history. We've never worked together. No. But I've hired people from Mercer before. They speak highly of you. That helped. Karen, if I clear this up, would you reconsider? Absolutely. Thank you. But Jake? Yeah? Don't let this become your identity. I didn't answer. She said goodbye. The next morning, my father called again. He had heard from someone at church that I was having trouble finding work. I didn't ask how that rumor had traveled. Come home for a few days, he said. Dad, I'm fine. You're not. I looked around my apartment. I have enough money. That's not what I meant. I eventually drove north. My mother made too much food. My father didn't ask many questions. That night, he came into the garage while I was sitting on an old workbench. You know what I did when I lost my job at the plant? He asked. No. I thought about proving everyone wrong. I smiled. What did you do? I got another job. That's it. That's it. That's it. You didn't fight them? No. He shrugged. Sometimes the best revenge is leaving people with the problem they created. I looked at him. What if they tried to make sure I couldn't get another job? He didn't answer immediately. Then you don't play by their rules. What does that mean? It means you figure out what you're actually good at. I thought about that. Operations. Then find someone who needs someone good at operations. It isn't that simple. No, but it is that simple eventually. I slept badly that night. At 3:18 a.m., I woke up with an idea. The Atlas expansion forecast. I knew the original capacity model. I knew the assumptions. I knew the cost of additional warehouse space. But I didn't have the final version finance used. I couldn't access it. I didn't need to. If the final revenue projection existed, it would have been based on assumptions. I could reconstruct the operational side from the July model and public information. I opened my laptop and started building a new spreadsheet for memory. I wasn't copying anything confidential. I was recreating the operational calculation I had personally developed. It took 6 hours. When I finished, the conclusion was ugly. Under the announced expansion volume, Mercer would need approximately 28% more warehouse capacity than it had available. Even if they squeezed overtime, they couldn't sustain the promised service levels. The gap wasn't minor, it was enormous. I emailed the spreadsheet to Laura. She reviewed it and said, "This is useful context, but it doesn't prove accounting misconduct." I know. Don't send it to anyone else. Okay. And don't make claims you can't support. I'm not. Good. Then she asked a question that changed everything. Jake, what exactly was your responsibility on Atlas? Operational feasibility. Were you required to sign off on capacity? Yes. Did you sign off? No. Did you sign off? No. Did anyone sign off in your place? I thought back. Not that I know of. That's important. I searched my old email records for the last approval document I legitimately had. I found a copy of a project checklist from August. My name was listed as the operational approver. Under the signature line, it said pending capacity validation. That validation never happened. I knew because I had been waiting for finance to send the revised volume forecast. The next document in the chain was missing, but I remembered something else. In September, Richard had told me, "Don't worry about the capacity sign-off. We'll handle it at executive level." At the time, I had assumed he meant Colin would coordinate with finance. Now I wondered whether he had been removing me from the approval chain before they removed me from the company. I wrote that down. Then I noticed the date on the checklist, August 14. I had been moved out of the formal approval process more than 2 months before my termination. Why? I called Laura. I found something. She sighed. Tell me. I was removed from the Atlas approval chain in August. How? Richard told me executive leadership would handle it. Do you have the document? Yes, a personal copy. Good. Does that matter? Potentially. Why? Because if they later claim you had authority over the final numbers, we can show your role had been narrowed. I stared at the page. So the story they told about me being responsible for the information isn't exactly true. Maybe. And if they say I stole it, why would I steal information I was already responsible for? That's a good question. It gets better. How? The files they accuse me of accessing were created after I was removed from the approval chain. There was silence. Jake, Laura said slowly, that's the first thing you told me that could potentially connect the timing directly. Because? Because if the documents were created after your role was reduced, there's a question about why someone would suddenly attribute unauthorized access to you. I looked at the dates. Exactly. The next morning, Melissa called from an unfamiliar number. Don't save this number, she said. Why? Because I don't want them seeing it. Who? Mercer. You're not working there. You're not working there. I know. What's happening? I talked to an attorney. Good. He thinks I should tell you something. What? The meeting where Richard said you wouldn't be seeing the numbers after that week? I remembered another thing. What? Evan asked whether you had copies of the old capacity model. I sat down. What did Richard say? He told him not to worry because your access would be removed. When? The same meeting. Before my firing? Yes. Did Evan know? Yes. Did Heaven know? Yes. Did he ask why? He said, what if Jake keeps copies? I felt a chill. What did Richard say? He said, then we'll deal with it. I wrote every word down. Melissa, are you sure? Yes. Do you have your notes? Yes, do we have your notes? My lawyer has them. Good. Jake, there's one more thing. What? The person who created the file access report wasn't IT. I stopped. Who was it? I don't know. How do you know? How do you know? Because I saw the email. What email? The request for the report. Who requested it? Colin Wade. And who did he send it to? Someone in compliance. Who? A woman named Patricia Lane. Patricia Wen, Mercer's compliance director. I'd met her maybe 4 times in 8 years. She was confident, quiet, and almost invisible. When was the request sent? October 18, the day after the access. Yes. Then how did Richard know about the access before October 18? Melissa was silent. What? I asked. I don't know. That was the problem. We had found a gap. The access supposedly happened October 17. Colin requested the report October 18. But Daniel had been questioned about the Cleveland meeting before my termination on October 20. That could still be explained by a quick internal review, yet something didn't fit. I called Mike. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. I told him what I knew. He listened carefully. If Colin requested the report after the event, that's normal. What isn't normal? The question is, what prompted the request? Exactly. Do you have the email? No. Then don't assume. I won't. He stirred his coffee. But there's another thing you should check. What? Your account history? I don't have access. Personal records. What do you mean? When your account was created, Mercer probably sent you security enrollment notices. I have some. Look for authentication changes. I searched my old email archive that night. I found an automated security notification from October 16 at 11:47 p.m. It said my multi-factor authentication method had been updated. I stared at the screen. I had not changed it. I hadn't even been awake at 11:47:47. I had been in Cleveland. The notification was from Mercer's security system. I called Laura immediately. She told me to preserve the message and not forward it to anyone except her. This is important, she said. Why? Because if your authentication method was changed before the alleged access, that's a potential explanation for how someone else could have used your credentials. Can we prove who changed it? Not from this email. Could Mercer? Likely. Would they admit it? Probably not voluntarily. I sat in silence. Jake? Yeah? This is the point where you need to stop investigating personally. Why? Because you're starting to uncover things that could become legally significant. I want the truth, I know, but you don't want to accidentally contaminate evidence or create an argument that you obtained information improperly. Okay, let your attorney investigate. You're saying I should stop? I'm saying you should document and preserve what you already have and let me handle the next steps. I agree. For the next several days, I forced myself to stop digging. It was harder than I expected. I watched job listings, I worked out, I cooked, I called my sister. I tried to live like a person who hadn't spent every waking hour thinking about a company that had decided I was disposable. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, an envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single photocopy. It was a page from an internal Mercer meeting calendar. The meeting was dated October 16 at 4:30 p.m. The attendees were Richard Mercer, Colin Wade, Patricia Lane, and Evan Mercer. The subject line read, Atlas Final Transition. Underneath, there was one sentence in the notes field, confirm replacement and access removal. I stared at it until the words blurred. The envelope contained no message, no explanation. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. I called Laura. She told me not to touch the original beyond preserving it. Do you recognize the calendar format? She asked. Yes. Could it be fabricated? It could. Do you know whether that meeting happened? I know Richard was in the building. Colin was too. Evan was there. How do you know? Evan called me later that week. That's not enough. I know. She paused. But if authentic, this is significant. The date is the night before the alleged access. Yes. And the note says access removal. Yes. Which means they plan to remove my access. Potentially. Before they claim I misused it. Potentially. How do we verify it? We need the calendar metadata or testimony from someone who can authenticate it. I looked at the photocopy. Who sent this? I don't know. Could be Melissa. Maybe. Could be Daniel. Maybe. Could be Daniel. Maybe. Could be someone still inside. Maybe. You're not going to tell me to ignore it. No. I'm going to tell you to give it to me. I did. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about Richard. For 8 years, I'd believed I understood him. He was demanding but fair. He remembered birthdays. He sometimes showed up at warehouse openings with his sleeves rolled up. He'd once driven 3 hours to sit with an employee whose wife had been hospitalized. He promoted me when nobody else thought I was ready. I had spent years defending him when people complained about his temper. He expects a lot because he built a place, I had said. He's not perfect, but he's fair. Now I couldn't decide which version was real. Maybe both were. Maybe people didn't become villains overnight. Maybe Richard had spent years being a decent boss and then found himself in a situation where protecting the company, his family, and his own future became more important than being decent. That possibility bothered me more than if he'd simply been evil. It meant there was no clean explanation. There was only a series of choices. A week later, Laura called. "I have news. Good or bad? Complicated. That's usually bad. We sent a preservation letter to Mercer, and their attorney responded. What did they say? They deny wrongdoing, of course. They also say your allegation that the termination was retaliatory is unsupported. Retaliatory against what? They don't know what you're alleging. Neither do I. Exactly, I laughed. What else? They insist the access logs are legitimate. Did they provide them? No. Why not? Because they say the logs contain proprietary security information. I stared at the ceiling. Convenient. Very. Can we subpoena them? Eventually, maybe. But litigation is expensive. How expensive? She gave me a number. It was more than I had in savings. I can't afford that. I know. Then what do I do? We look for another route, such as administrative agencies, employment claims, defamation depending on what they told third parties, and potentially the financial issue if there is evidence of intentional misreporting. But I don't know whether there is. Correct. So we're still guessing. We're developing facts. That distinction mattered. I didn't want revenge based on suspicion. I wanted something stronger. I wanted the truth so thoroughly documented that nobody could wave it away as a bitter ex-employee's story. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Karen from North Line called me on a Friday evening. "I know you said you weren't going to contact anyone at Mercer," she said. "I didn't." "Good. Why?" "Because someone from Atlas contacted us." I sat up. "About what?" "They asked whether we could handle a regional overflow project." "Atlas?" "Yes." "Why would they ask Northline?" "Because Mercer can't." I felt my pulse quicken. "What did they say?" "They didn't give details." "When?" "When?" "This week." "Who contacted you?" "Their procurement manager." "Did they mention Mercer?" "Yes." "What did they say?" "They're concerned about service capacity." I closed my eyes. The operational problem was becoming real. "Karen, can you take the business?" "We're evaluating it." "Good. Why are you so interested?" "Because I think Mercer promised them something they can't deliver." "Can you prove that?" "Not yet." "Then don't tell anyone." "I won't." She paused. "Jake, if you ever decide to build something yourself, call me." I smiled. "That's the second time you've said that. Maybe I'm trying to tell you something." "What?" "You don't belong at Mercer anymore." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at the spreadsheet I'd built. For the first time, I considered that my future might not be about getting another corporate job. Maybe I had spent 8 years becoming useful to one company when I should have been becoming valuable to myself. But I wasn't ready to think about that yet. I still had a name to clear. And then, 3 days later, Evan made the mistake that changed everything. He sent an email to an old distribution list by accident. I wasn't supposed to receive it. I only saw it because Daniel had forwarded it to himself before his termination. And Daniel, now free from Mercer, sent me a screenshot. The email was from Evan to Richard, Colin, and Patricia. The subject line was, "Atlas transition issues." The body was short. "I don't understand why the old capacity model was excluded from the final forecast. Jake's model shows we can't support the committed volume. Please advise before Thursday's client call." Beneath that was a reply from Colin. "Use the approved forecast. Do not reopen prior assumptions." Then Richard had replied, "Evan, this is exactly why we made the transition. Stay within the numbers provided." I read the exchange 3 times. Then I saw Evan's next reply. "But if Atlas asks why the operational model doesn't match, what am I supposed to tell them?" Richard answered, "Tell them the model was outdated." There was one more line. It was from Evan. "Jake built the model 2 months ago. It isn't outdated." I stared at the screen. Evan knew. He might not have known everything, but he knew the numbers didn't work. He knew my model existed. He knew the company had deliberately excluded it. And somewhere in that chain was the answer to why they needed me gone. I called Laura. She said, "Save the screenshot." "Already did. Do not alter it." "I won't." "Do you know whether Daniel can authenticate where it came from?" "I'll ask." "Don't ask him for anything else." "Okay." She paused. "Jake?" "Yeah?" "This is no longer just about your termination." I looked at the email again. "I know. If the company knowingly used a forecast that excluded known operational limitations, and if the revenue was recognized or represented based on that forecast, we may be dealing with something much more serious." "How serious?" "Serious enough that you need to stop thinking about revenge." I smiled without humor. "I'm not thinking about revenge." She didn't believe me. "You're thinking about accountability." "That sounds better. Then prove it." I closed the laptop. Outside my window, traffic moved through the intersection in steady waves. People were going home from work, buying groceries, picking up their kids, complaining about traffic, making dinner. Normal life was continuing while mine had become a strange puzzle built from dates and documents. I had spent 8 years believing my greatest value was knowing how Mercer worked. Now I was beginning to understand that my greatest value might be knowing where the company had stopped working. The next morning, I received another message from Melissa. "My attorney says I'm allowed to tell you this." I opened it. The October 16 meeting wasn't the first meeting about removing you. I stared at the sentence. Then another message appeared. There was one in September. I didn't reply immediately. A third message arrived. "And you were the subject of that meeting too." "And you were the subject of that meeting too." I read Melissa's message 3 times before I answered because there are moments when your brain understands the word but refuses to accept what they mean. "What meeting?" I finally wrote. She didn't respond for almost an hour. When she did, there was no explanation, only a date, September 9. I opened the calendar on my phone and stared at it. September 9 had been an ordinary Tuesday. I had spent most of that day at our Dayton warehouse dealing with a problem involving a damaged shipment of industrial pumps. I remembered the day because the warehouse manager, Tom, had called me at 6:40 that morning and told me the customer was threatening to cancel the entire account. I had driven there, spent the afternoon sorting through photographs, inspection reports, and carrier paperwork, and returned to Columbus around 7. Nothing about that day had seemed important. Now Melissa was telling me that while I was in Dayton, 4 executives had apparently been discussing how to remove me. I wrote, "Who was there?" Her response came back, "Richard, Colin, Patricia, Evan." I stared at Evan's name. "Why was Evan there?" I asked. "Because the conversation was about succession." That word hit differently than everything else. Succession. Not discipline, not security, not performance. Succession. Someone had been discussing who would take over my responsibilities before I had any reason to believe my job was in danger. I called Laura. She answered immediately. "Tell me." I gave her the date, attendees, and what Melissa had said. "Do you have documentation?" she asked. "Not yet." "Then don't accuse anyone." "I'm not." "Good. But if Evan was being prepared to replace me in September, the October access incident can't be the reason they fired me." "Correct. It would have to be the justification." She paused. "That's one possible interpretation." "What other interpretation is there?" "They could have been discussing contingency planning." "For me?" "Maybe." "Why?" "Performance issue. Restructuring. Succession." "We don't know." "I'm performance issue. Restructuring. Succession. We don't know." I knew she was being careful. That was her job. Mine was to remember. I went back through the previous months in my head and started looking for anything unusual. My responsibilities had changed in subtle ways. In July, Richard had asked me to stop attending one finance meeting because we needed fewer operational voices. In August, I had been removed from the Atlas approval chain. In late August, Colin had started asking me for historical capacity numbers directly instead of through my team. In early September, Evan had been included in 2 meetings he'd never attended before. None of it had seemed threatening because each individual change had a reasonable explanation. Together, they looked different. It was like seeing a map after spending months looking at individual streets. The shape had been there all along. I called Mike and asked whether he remembered any security changes around September. "Why?" he asked. "Because I need to know whether my access profile changed before I was fired." "You don't work there anymore." "I know." "Then why would your old profile matter?" "Because the accusation involves my credentials." He was quiet. "I can't access their systems." "I'm not asking you to." "Good, but I might remember something," he thought. Mercer did a security audit in September. "What kind?" "Credential cleanup." "What does that mean?" "They were supposed to review privileged accounts, old employee access, remote authentication, things like that." "Who ran it?" "Patricia's team." "Compliance?" "Yes." Was IT involved? A little. Why? A little. Why? Because compliance couldn't make the technical changes themselves. Who in IT? Probably Mark Ellis. Mark was the current IT director. Did you work with him? Before I left, what was he like? Smart, careful, not political. Would he have access to authentication records? Yes. Could he tell whether my MFA was changed? Absolutely. Would he? Mike laughed. Not if he's still employed. I thanked him. He said, Jake, be careful. I am. No, you're investigating people who control your old company's money, legal team, and systems. That's not the same thing as being careful. I didn't have a good response. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Maura. She had found something. Mercer had responded to her preservation request and confirmed that my account credentials had been reviewed and secured on October 16. They did not provide details. My authentication notification showed that my MFA method had been updated at 11:47 p.m. that night. The alleged unauthorized file access occurred October 17 at 2014 p. Mayor Borshen, the company said it discovered the access afterward. I wrote the timeline out in large letters on a whiteboard I'd bought specifically for this purpose. September 9, succession meeting. August 14, removed from Atlas approval chain. October 15, revenue numbers revised. October 16, meeting about transition and access removal. October 16, 11:47 p.m. MFA changed. October 17, alleged file access. October 18, access report requested. October 20th, termination. October 20th, Evans' new agreement effective. October 22nd, Atlas publicly announces expanded partnership. October 28th, Atlas contract finalized. October 31st, original renewal deadline. Looking at it all at once made my stomach turn. The sequence wasn't random, but I still didn't know what the September meeting had actually been about. Melissa eventually called me. I can tell you what was said, she said, but I can't give you the notes. That's fine. I wrote them from memory. Go ahead. Richard said the company was entering a difficult quarter. Okay. Colin said the bank was watching their numbers. What numbers? Revenue and operating margin. Did he mention Atlas? Yes. What did he say? He said Atlas could solve the problem. I sat down. How? By pulling forward the expansion revenue. Before the contract? Yes. Who objected? Patricia. What did she say? She said the documentation wasn't complete. And Richard? He said they'd get it. What about me? Melissa hesitated. Richard said you were becoming a problem. I closed my eyes. Because of the capacity model? Because you kept asking questions. What questions? Why finance was using revenue assumptions that operations hadn't approved? I remembered that. In August, I'd sent Colin an email asking why the forecast volume had increased by 22% while the warehouse capacity plan had not changed. He had replied with a single sentence, "Executive assumptions are still being finalized." I'd forgotten about it. What else did Richard say? I asked. He said you were too loyal to the numbers. Too loyal to the numbers? Too loyal to the numbers? That's how I remember it. I laughed quietly. That's a strange thing to be punished for. He didn't say punished. What did he say? He said you didn't understand the difference between operational reality and executive responsibility. That sounded exactly like Richard. Polite enough to sound reasonable. Vague enough to mean almost anything. What did Evan say? Almost nothing. Why was he there? Because Richard said Evan needed to understand the business before he took on more responsibility. More responsibility doing what? Operations. I looked at the whiteboard. He was being trained to replace me. I think so. Did anyone say that directly? Richard said Jake's position needs a succession plan. Huh. I wrote it down. That's all? No. What else? Colin asked how quickly Evan could take over. And Richard said once Jake is out of the way. I stopped writing. Did he say those exact words? Yes. You're sure? Yes. You're sure? Yes. I thanked her. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me. Why didn't you tell me in September? She sighed. Because I was afraid. Of Richard? Of losing my job? Of being wrong? Of making things worse? I understand. Do you? Yes. I understand. Do you? Yes. I thought maybe you had screwed something up. That hurt. You believed it? For about a week. Why? Because Richard told people you were refusing to cooperate with finance. I remembered that accusation. I had assumed it was office politics. What did you think I was refusing to do? Approve the revised Atlas numbers. I wasn't authorized to approve them. I know that now. Who told you I was? Colin. I wrote his name down. Again, it was becoming a pattern. Colin controlled the financial narrative. Richard controlled the personnel narrative. Patricia controlled compliance. Evan was positioned to inherit the operational role. The problem was figuring out whether all four were acting together or whether some were simply following decisions made by others. I didn't want to make that mistake. I had already been wrong about Richard. I didn't want to replace one assumption with another. 2 days later, Laura asked me to meet her at her office. She had printed several documents. These came from a former Mercer employee who contacted me after hearing about your situation. Who? I'm not going to tell you until I know whether they're willing to be identified. Fair. She placed the first page on the table. It was a copy of an internal policy. What's this? Mercer's revenue recognition policy. I know it. Read the section I've highlighted. I did. It said revenue associated with expansion services could not be recognized as committed until the client had executed the agreement and operational capacity had been validated. I looked up. That's exactly what I told Colin. When? September. And you were removed from the approval chain shortly afterward. I nodded. Now look at this. She placed another document beside it. It was a financial reporting schedule dated October 15. The Atlas expansion was listed as committed recurring revenue. I stared at it. That's before the contract. Yes. Who approved this? The document shows Colin's initials, and Richard copied. Patricia? Not on the document. Could be elsewhere. Yes. Does this prove fraud? No. What does it prove? That's a problem. Potentially. And if they needed that revenue to satisfy their lender, then the pressure becomes more significant. She slid over another page. This is the lender covenant. I read it. Mercer had to maintain a minimum quarterly operating ratio. If it failed, the lender could demand additional reporting and potentially restrict certain activities. How close were they? I asked. According to the information we have, very close. How close? Close enough that a few million in recognized revenue mattered. I looked at her, so Atlas wasn't just a big account. No. It was the difference between meeting the covenant and missing it. Possibly. And I knew the operational model couldn't support the expansion. Yes, which meant if I challenged the revenue number, you could have forced them to explain it. I leaned back. That's why they needed me gone. Laura didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew what the timeline suggested. But then she said something I hadn't considered. There's still a missing piece. The access incident. Exactly. If they wanted me gone, why fabricate an accusation involving files I already knew existed? Because a performance-based termination would have been difficult. My reviews were good. Very. And because they needed to damage my reputation. Yes. But why make it look like I stole information? Because it creates a reason not to rehire you and discourages other companies from hiring you. I looked down at the table. That had already happened. It worked. For now. What if that's all they wanted? Then we need to know whether they expected the Atlas problem to blow up after you were gone, and whether Evan was supposed to be the person who took the blame. Laura nodded. That could be important. I thought about Evan's call. He hadn't sounded confident. He'd sounded trapped. He knew the numbers didn't match. He had asked me for help. Maybe he hadn't understood why he was being placed there. Maybe his father had told him that taking over my role was a promotion, not a shield. I decided to call him. Laura didn't like the idea, but she didn't forbid it. Keep it factual, she said. Don't threaten him. Don't ask him to give you confidential information. Understood. Evan answered after 3 rings. Jake? Hey, what's up? I wanted to ask how Atlas is going. Silence. Why? Because you called me before. I know. You said the numbers didn't match. I shouldn't have called you. Maybe not. My dad found out? I frowned. What did he say? He told me to stop contacting you. Did he say why? He said you're trying to hurt the company? Do you believe that? I don't know what to believe. Evan, did you know about the transition before I was fired? Yes? How long? He hesitated. A few weeks. Since September? Another pause. Yeah. Did you know the company was planning to accuse me? No. Did you know your new contract was ready before my termination? Yes. When did you learn that? My dad gave it to me on the 18th. The 18th? Yeah. But it was effective the 20th. I didn't understand the date. Did you ask? No. Why not? He sounded embarrassed. Because I thought it was normal. Evan, you're 26. You can read an employment agreement. I know. What did your dad tell you? That you were leaving. Why? He said you were going to pursue something else. I laughed. And you believed him? At first. Then HR called me. When? The morning you were fired. Before or after the meeting? Before. What did they say? They told me not to come into your office until after the meeting. Why? They said it would be awkward. And you came anyway. I didn't know what else to do. Evan, what? Why? Why did you call me the night after? Because I saw the capacity numbers. And because they didn't make sense. Did you tell your dad? Yes. What did he say? He told me the old model was outdated. Did you believe him? No. Why not? He was silent for several seconds. Because I looked at the warehouse reports. What did you find? We were already close to capacity before the expansion. Exactly. Jake, I don't want to be in the middle of this. Neither did I. I know. Do you understand why they fired me? I think so. What do you think? Because you wouldn't sign off. On what? The Atlas forecast. Did anyone tell you that? My dad. One. Before you were fired. I wrote that down. Did he say anything else? He said you were going to become a liability. Did he use that word? Yes. Anything about confidential information? No. When did you first hear that? In the termination meeting. You weren't in the room. I heard it afterward. From who? Denise. That was useful. HR had apparently told Evan about the accusation after the meeting. Evan, why are you still working there? What? You could leave. It's my father's company. That's not an answer. It's complicated. Because you want to prove yourself? He didn't answer. Evan, I'm not asking you to choose sides. Good. I'm asking you to pay attention. I am. Then look at what they're asking you to sign. He went quiet. What do you mean? If they ask you to certify operational capacity, make sure you can actually support it. They already have me signing things. Then read them. I do. Good. Jake? Yeah? I don't think they expected the warehouse numbers to be this bad. They knew. Maybe not the full extent. Maybe. What happens if Atlas finds out? I didn't answer. That's what I'm afraid of, he said. Then don't lie to them. My dad will kill me. He's not going to kill you. You know what I mean. I do. He sounded younger than 26. I wish you told me more when I worked for you. About what? How you knew all this stuff. You never asked. I thought you were just good at spreadsheets. I laughed. That's insulting. I know. Take care of yourself, Evan. You too. He hung up. I didn't know whether I'd helped him or made things worse. I immediately called Laura and told her what he'd said. Write it down, she said. Already did. Do not contact him again unless he contacts you. Understood. That night I couldn't sleep. The picture was becoming clearer, but clarity didn't make it less disturbing. Richard had decided in September that I needed to go. Colin needed Atlas revenue to appear committed. Patricia was involved in compliance. Evan was being positioned as my replacement. Then sometime around October 16, my access was supposedly removed or altered. On October 17, my credentials were allegedly used to access sensitive files. On October 20, I was fired. The accusation conveniently gave the company a reason to sever me and discredit me, but there was still one thing I couldn't explain: who actually changed my authentication method. I couldn't prove it. I needed someone inside who understood the system and was willing to tell the truth. I thought of Mark Ellis, the IT director. I had known him for years. He wasn't a friend, but we'd worked together on warehouse system migrations. He had always hated office politics. I didn't contact him directly. I asked Mike whether Mark was still there. Yes, Mike said. Why? No reason. Jake, I know. Don't drag him into this. I'm not. But 2 days later, Mark contacted me himself. The message came from a personal number I didn't recognize. It's Mark. We need to talk, but not by phone. We met at a diner outside the city. He arrived alone, wearing a baseball cap and a jacket I'd never seen him wear at work. He looked exhausted. You shouldn't have contacted me, he said. I didn't. I know. He sat down. I asked Mike whether you were okay. I'm not. He nodded. I figured. Why are we here? He looked around before answering. Because your account was manipulated. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? I can't show you anything. I can't show you anything. I know. But I can tell you what I saw. Go ahead. On October 16, I got a ticket from compliance. Patricia? Yes. What did it request? Temporary credential review for several executives and operational managers? Me? You were one of them. Why? The ticket said it was part of a security audit. Was it? He gave me a look. Not in the normal sense. What happened? Someone asked us to remove your remote access. Who? Who? The request came through Patricia's team. Did Richard approve it? I don't know. Did Colin? I don't know. Did you remove it? Yes. When? I don't know. Did you remove it? Yes. When? Around 10:30 p.m. more. What happened afterward? At 11:47, your MFA enrollment changed. I didn't do that. I know. Who did? He looked down. I know. Who did? He looked down. I can't tell you without putting my job at risk. Mark, I'm already fired. I'm not. Fair. But here's what I can tell you. He leaned forward. The MFA change was not part of the normal removal process. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means someone initiated a separate action. From where? I can't tell you. Could you tell whether it was an administrator? Yes. Was it? He nodded. So someone with administrative access changed my MFA. Yes. Then used my credentials? I don't know. But my account was active again? Not exactly. What does that mean? Your remote access was disabled, but an existing authenticated session may have remained active. I felt a chill. For how long? Depends on the system. Could someone have used a session that was already open? Potentially. Was my laptop online? I don't know. But the access logs could show my user ID. Yes. Even if someone else was behind it, depending on how the session was established. I leaned back. Why would someone do that? Mark didn't answer. You know, I said. I don't. Then why tell me? He looked directly at me. Because after the access event, someone asked IT to preserve the logs. Who? Compliance. Patricia. Yes, that's normal. Not the way they asked. What did they ask? What did they ask? They wanted the logs associated with your user ID isolated from the rest of the system. I felt my stomach drop. Why? They said it was for an investigation. But the investigation hadn't been announced. Not to you. I understood. Mark, did you see the files they claim I accessed? I can't discuss their contents. I don't need contents. Were they actually accessed? He hesitated. Yes, by my account. The logs show your account. But you can't say it was me. No, because you don't know. Correct. Would the logs show the originating device? Yes. Was it mine? He looked at me. I can't tell you that because you don't know, because I shouldn't have this conversation. I nodded. Okay, he stood. Jake, yeah? Whatever you do, don't try to get back into Mercer Systems. I won't. And don't tell anyone I met you. I won't. Good. He walked out. I sat there for another 15 minutes. It wasn't proof of who manipulated my account, but it was enough to change the case. The access event might not have required someone to steal my password. It might have been created by manipulating an existing authenticated session after my remote access was supposedly removed. More importantly, the company had isolated the logs associated with my user ID before I was accused. That suggested someone knew exactly what they wanted the investigation to show. I called Laura from the parking lot. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Now we have a potential witness. Mark won't testify. Not yet. He's scared. That's understandable. Can we subpoena him? Eventually, if there's litigation, we still can't afford it. I know. Then what? We need to find another way to make the truth matter before you spend years and money fighting over it." I knew what she meant. If the company's hidden financial problem became public through legitimate channels, the access accusation would look different. But I couldn't simply accuse them publicly. I needed someone with authority to review the financial issue. We started looking at regulatory and contractual obligations. Mercer wasn't publicly traded, which limited the options. But the lender covenant mattered, so did the Atlas contract. If Atlas had been given false operational assurances, the client had its own lawyers and auditors. I couldn't contact them and dump accusations on their desk. That could look like retaliation. But I could tell my attorney what I knew and let her decide. She began exploring whether there were legitimate channels through which the information could be presented without me becoming the source of an unsupported public accusation. Meanwhile, Mercer was fighting back in another way. A former coworker texted me one night. "Heard you threaten to expose the company." I stared at the message. "Who told you that?" Someone at Mercer. I never threatened anyone. I know. What else are they saying? That you're trying to get revenge. I laughed. They're making it easy. What do you mean? If they keep saying I'm unstable and angry, every normal action I take becomes evidence in their story. He replied, exactly. That was when I realized something important. They didn't need to prove I had stolen anything if they could make people believe I was a disgruntled former employee. The best way to fight that wasn't to shout louder. It was to become boring. Calm. Documented. Predictable. I stopped discussing Mercer with anyone who wasn't my attorney or a directly relevant witness. I stopped posting. I stopped responding to rumors. I focused on rebuilding my professional life. Karen offered me consulting work through Northline, not employment. It was temporary and paid by project. I accepted. My first assignment involved reviewing a warehouse routing process for a client in Indiana. It was the first time in months someone had paid me because they trusted my judgment. I spent 3 days on site and found enough inefficiency to save the client a significant amount of money. Karen called afterward. You were right about the process. Thanks. They're happy. Good. I want to bring you on full time. I hesitated. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I'm ready to work for another company. That's fair. I might want to do consulting. Then do consulting. She paused. You don't have to decide your entire life this month. I smiled. That's probably the best advice I've gotten. The work gave me structure. It also reminded me who I was before Mercer became the center of my life. But the investigation didn't stop. Laura found another document. This one was a lender communication dated October 13. Mercer had been asked to explain a projected shortfall in operating performance. Colin's response said the company expected a major client expansion to close before the end of the month and materially improve revenue. The client was not named, but the timing matched Atlas. I looked at the document and realized something. On October 13th, Mercer was already telling the lender the expansion was expected. On October 15, finance classified it as committed. On October 16, leadership met about my transition and access. On October 17, my credentials were supposedly used to access confidential files. On October 20th, I was fired. The contract wasn't finalized until October 28th. That sequence was no longer just suspicious. It was a coherent story. The company needed the Atlas expansion to protect its financial position. The operational reality didn't support the promised numbers. I was the person most capable of challenging them. They had already decided to replace me. They needed a reason to remove me and make sure I couldn't challenge their numbers afterward. The Axis accusation served both purposes, but there was another problem for them. Evan had inherited my position, and Evan was beginning to see the same numbers I had seen. 3 weeks after our phone call, he contacted me again. I need to ask you something. Okay, if Atlas cancels, what happens to Mercer? I didn't answer immediately. Why are you asking? Because they're threatening to. My stomach tightened. What happened? The first shipment under the expansion missed the service window. By how much? 16 hours. That's bad. They're furious. What did you tell them? I told them we'd fix it. Can you? No. Then don't promise it. Can you? No. Then don't promise it. My dad already did. Of course. He laughed bitterly. He says the warehouse is fine. It's not. I know. What does Atlas think? They think we misrepresented capacity. They're right. Jake, I'm not telling you to lie. I know. What are you going to do? I don't know. He sounded genuinely frightened. Evan, you need your own attorney. My dad will lose it. That's not your biggest problem. What is? Being the person who signed something you didn't understand. He went quiet. I haven't signed the next forecast. Good. They want it tomorrow. Read it. I did. And it still uses the old assumptions. Then don't sign it. My dad says refusing would make me look incompetent. You were put in a position you weren't ready for. Thanks. I'm being honest. I know. We ended the call. I immediately told Laura. She said, this is where your revenge instincts need to stay out of it. I'm not doing anything. Good. But if Evan refuses to sign, that's his decision. And if he tells Atlas the truth, that's also his decision. Could that expose Mercer? Potentially. Could it expose Mercer? Potentially. Could it expose me? Only if they try to connect you to it. I nodded. They will. Then we keep your evidence separate and clean. 2 days later, the first major setback hit. Patricia Lane sent Laura a letter accusing me of soliciting confidential information from former Mercer employees and interfering with ongoing business relationships. It demanded that I cease all contact with former coworkers. Laura showed me the letter. I felt my face get hot. They're trying to make me look like I'm harassing people. Yes. I called 3 people. Who contacted you first? 2 of them. Good. Does that matter? Potentially. Can they stop me from talking to people? Not generally, but depending on agreements and circumstances, there can be boundaries. I haven't asked anyone for documents. That's important. What about Daniel? He contacted you. Melissa? You contacted you. Mark? He contacted you. Mark? He contacted you. Laura looked at me. You've been unusually careful. Because you told me to be. Keep doing that. But the letter worked psychologically. For several days, I became afraid to answer my phone. Every unknown number looked like another threat. Every message from a former coworker made me wonder whether they were trying to bait me. I nearly stopped speaking to everyone. Then I realized that was exactly what the company wanted. Isolation, silence, doubt. So I didn't chase anyone. I simply kept the channels open. The next major break came from Daniel. He had retained his own attorney after being laid off. His lawyer contacted Laura and said Daniel was willing to provide a statement about the Cleveland meeting. Not about the financial issue. Not about confidential company information. Only about what he personally witnessed. That statement mattered because it established that I had been physically present in Cleveland during the alleged file access period, and that the company had questioned him about whether I could have used my laptop. It wasn't enough to clear me, but it weakened their narrative. More importantly, Daniel's statement included a detail I had forgotten. During the Cleveland meeting, my laptop had been connected to the conference room display from 1058 p.m. on until 3006 p.m. I had used it to present a slide deck. That meant the laptop was physically in use in front of 3 people at the exact time the access record supposedly showed me opening sensitive files. Could I have done both? Technically, maybe. But the conference room display had shown the presentation continuously. Daniel remembered because the screen froze once and I had to reconnect it. The Atlas operations director remembered too. Suddenly, the company's claim that I had secretly accessed files during the meeting looked much weaker. Laura sent the statement to Mercer's attorney. They responded with a single sentence. The company stands by its prior determination. I laughed when I read it. That's it? Laura asked. That's it? They don't have to concede. I know. But now they know we have a witness. Yes. I looked at the whiteboard. And they know I know about the MFA change. Laura nodded, which means they may start changing their strategy. She was right. The next week, Mercer sent a revised termination explanation. The original letter had said I had removed and potentially disclosed confidential information. The new letter said I had violated company security policies by accessing restricted files without authorization. The wording was narrower, less criminal, less damaging. But it created another problem. The original accusation had been about stealing. The new one was about access. Why change the language? Laura noticed too. They're trying to reduce exposure, she said, because they know the original claim may not hold up. So they admit nothing. Exactly. Can they do that? They can characterize the termination however they want internally, within legal limits. Then how do I clear my name? By showing the story changed. That became another line in my notes. Original allegation, removed, retained, potentially disclosed. Revised allegation, unauthorized access. The company wasn't simply defending the same accusation. It was moving the goalposts, and I knew why. Their first version required them to imply I had taken information. Their second only required them to claim I had accessed it. The difference was enormous. I asked Laura whether we could use that inconsistency. Yes, she said, but don't overstate it. I won't. The stronger argument is that the company had a shifting explanation for the termination while refusing to provide the underlying evidence. Understood. Meanwhile, Evan's situation was deteriorating. Atlas had demanded a corrective plan. Evan was supposed to present it. He called me the night before. They want me to say the old capacity model was outdated. Is it? No. Then don't. My dad says it's the only way. Then your dad is asking you to lie. He sighed. I know. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell them the truth. I was silent. What? He asked. Nothing. What? He asked. Nothing. You think I'm going to screw it up? I think telling the truth is the only thing you can do now. Thanks. Evan. Yeah? Whatever happens, don't do anything because you think it will hurt me or help me. Why? Because this is your life. He didn't answer. Do what's right for you. You sound different. I am. How? I spent 8 years thinking the company was my future. And now? Now I think my future is somewhere else. He was quiet. I wish I had figured that out before you did. You still have time. He hung up. The next morning, Atlas's procurement team requested a meeting with Mercer leadership. Evan was there. So were Richard and Cullen. Patricia joined by video. According to Evan, the meeting lasted 2 hours. He later told me only what his attorney permitted him to share. He said Atlas asked why the operational capacity model had been changed. Richard blamed an outdated model. Atlas asked who created the original model. Evan said, Jake. Atlas asked whether Jake had approved the revised version. Evan said no. Colin interrupted and said I had been removed from the project because I was not aligned with the company's strategic assumptions. Atlas asked what that meant. Nobody answered clearly. Then Atlas's operations director apparently asked the question that broke the room open. If your former operations director didn't approve the capacity model, who did? Colin said executive leadership. Atlas asked for the approval documentation. There was none. The meeting ended without resolution. 2 days later, Atlas suspended part of the expansion. Mercer lost the revenue it had been counting on. That was the first external consequence. It wasn't dramatic. No police, no handcuffs, no shouting. Just a client refusing to proceed with a deal because the numbers didn't make sense. But I understood what it meant. The financial pressure Mercer had been trying to postpone had arrived, and now the company had to explain why. A week later, the lender requested additional financial reporting. Laura learned this through public filings and information available through the company's financing documents. She told me not to celebrate. This is serious for them, she said. I know, but don't assume it means they're finished. I'm not. They may try to settle with you. Would I take it? That's your decision. What would you do? I'd decide based on what protects your future, not what feels satisfying today. I thought about that. Then I asked, what if they offer me money to sign a confidentiality agreement? Read it carefully. Would that stop me from telling regulators? Depends on the agreement and applicable law. Would it stop me from talking about my own experience? Potentially. Then I'd rather not. She smiled. Then I'd rather not. She smiled. That's why I asked you to think first. 2 days later, Richard called me personally. I almost didn't answer. Jake, Richard, how are you? I laughed. You fired me. I know. Then why are you asking? Because this has gone further than it should have. What has? The dispute. You mean the accusation? The situation. The situation. Those are different things. He was quiet. I'd like to resolve this. How? Privately. What does that mean? We can discuss severance. I already received severance, additional compensation. In exchange for? He didn't answer immediately. A clean separation? I was already separated. You know what I mean. No, I don't. His voice hardened slightly. Jake, this doesn't need to become a war. I leaned back. I don't want a war. Good. I want the truth. Silence. Sometimes those aren't compatible. Why not? Because people remember things differently. I have dates. Dates don't tell the whole story. Neither do accusations. He sighed. What do you want? The access logs. He went quiet. That's not something I can provide. Then there's nothing to discuss. You're making a mistake. Maybe. You could walk away with a substantial amount of money and still be the guy who stole confidential information. Nobody is saying that. Your original termination letter did. He didn't respond. Richard, I'm here. Did you plan to replace me before you accused me? Long silence. That's an unfair question. It's a simple one. Evan was being prepared for expanded responsibilities. Was my position part of that? The company was restructuring. In September, we were considering options. And on October 16, I don't remember the exact meeting. I smiled. I do. Jake, did you know my access was being changed that night? I don't manage IT. But did you know? Another silence. This conversation isn't productive. I agreed. Think about the offer. I will. You should. Richard? Yeah? You once told me the worst mistake a manager can make is underestimating the person who knows how the operation actually works. He was silent. Did I? He finally asked. You did. I meant it. So did I. I ended the call. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. Not because I had won. I hadn't, but Richard had called me. He was no longer certain I would simply disappear. That night, I met with Laura. "They're scared," I said. "Maybe you heard him." "I did. He offered him, I did. He offered money." "Yes." "Why now?" "Because the client problem is becoming real. And the lender." "Yes." "And they know we have witnesses." "Yes." "So what's next?" Laura opened a folder. "We may have a path." "What path?" She looked at me. "A former Mercer compliance employee is willing to provide evidence that the Access investigation was constructed after your removal was already planned." I stared at her. "Who? Patricia's former deputy?" My mouth went dry. "When did she leave?" "Shortly after you were fired." "Why?" "She says she was uncomfortable with how the investigation was handled." "What does she have?" Laura placed a document on the table. A copy of the original request that initiated the Access review. I looked down. The date was September 10. The day after the meeting Melissa had told me about. The request wasn't for a security investigation. It was for credential and document exposure assessment relating to Jake Harper's planned role transition. I read it again. Planned role transition. Before the alleged unauthorized access. Before the MFA change. Before the termination. I looked at Laura. They were already looking for a reason. She nodded. "That's what this suggests." And the person who requested it, I already knew the answer before she spoke. Colin Wade. I sat back and stared at the document while a strange calm came over me. For weeks I'd been trying to prove that my firing wasn't random. Now I had something much better. I had a document showing that the company had planned a transition involving my role and had initiated a review of my credentials more than a month before accusing me of misusing them. The accusation had not caused the plan. The plan had come first. The accusation came later. And suddenly, the entire sequence from September onward looked less like a company protecting itself from a dishonest employee and more like a company constructing a dishonest employee so it could protect itself. I looked at the date again, September 10, the day after Richard, Colin, Patricia, and Evan had discussed getting me out of the way. That was the first moment I knew this wasn't going to end with my old job, a settlement, or an apology. I didn't know exactly how it would end yet. But I knew the people who had built the story about me had made one mistake I could finally use against them. They had started writing the ending before they realized I would still be around to read the earlier pages. The first thing I did the next morning was not call Richard, Colin, Patricia, or Evan. I didn't call anyone at Mercer, I didn't post anything online, and I didn't send the document to a former coworker just because I knew they would be interested. I put the original copy Laura had given me back into the folder, made a note of exactly where it had come from, and then sat at my kitchen table staring at the coffee I'd poured 20 minutes earlier. I kept thinking about that phrase, planned role transition, not because it proved everything, but because it changed the order of events. Until that point, I had been trying to prove that the accusation against me was false. Now I had to prove something more precise. The company had decided to remove me before the alleged misconduct occurred. That didn't automatically mean the misconduct had been fabricated. It meant the company had a reason to want me gone that existed independently of the accusation. If I could connect that reason to the Atlas revenue problem, the entire story could be understood without guessing at anybody's motives. I called Laura. "I want to see the original document." "You already did." "I mean the source. That's going to depend on the witness." "I know. And before you ask, no, you can't contact her." I wasn't going to. "Good. What can we do?" "We can have her attorney communicate through me." "Okay. And we need to preserve the chain of custody." "Understood." "Jake, this is where people make mistakes." "What kind?" "They get excited. They start collecting everything they can find. They forward documents to themselves. They contact people. They make copies without recording where they came from. Then the other side argues the evidence was improperly obtained or altered. So, I do nothing." "No, you do exactly what we've been doing. You document what you know and let counsel handle the evidence." That was harder than it sounded. For 8 years at Mercer, if something was broken, I fixed it. If a shipment was late, I called the carrier. If a client was angry, I got on the phone. If a forecast didn't make sense, I opened the spreadsheet and found the bad assumption. Now the thing that needed fixing was my own life, and the best thing I could do was sit still. I hated it, but I did it. 3 days later, Laura called. "We have a meeting." "With who?" "The compliance witness." "In person?" "Yes." "In Westness?" "Yes." "Where?" "My office." "When?" "When? Tomorrow." I arrived early. The woman who walked in was named Rachel Monroe. She had been Patricia's deputy director of compliance for almost 6 years. I knew her by sight but had never worked closely with her. She looked like someone who had spent too many years learning how to keep her face neutral in meetings. She sat down, put a thick envelope on the table, and said, "I'm not here because I hate Mercer." "Okay, I don't hate Richard." "Okay, I don't even know if I think what happened to you was illegal." "I understand. I'm here because I don't want to lie anymore." Laura nodded. "Then only tell us what you personally know." Rachel looked at me. "That's the rule." "Fine." She opened the envelope. "This is the request Colin sent to compliance on September 10. She slid it across the table. I recognized the copy immediately. He asked us to conduct a credential and document exposure assessment related to your planned transition. Why would finance request that? They said your role was changing and there were concerns about access to sensitive financial materials. Did anyone say I had done anything wrong? No. Did anyone accuse me of anything? Not then. Did anyone tell you I was being terminated? Rachel looked at Laura before answering. Not in those words. What words? They said your responsibilities would be reassigned. To Evan? Yes. When? The same week. I looked down. What else did Colin request? Rachel pointed to the document. He wanted a list of every system you could access, every shared folder you had permission to enter, and any active credentials associated with your user profile. Why? He said it was necessary for the transition. Did you think that was unusual? At the time, no. Why not? Because executives request things like that all the time. Did you find anything concerning? Your access was broad. I was operations director. Exactly. Was any of it inappropriate? No. Then what happened? Rachel folded her hands. We began the review. Your permissions were normal. You had access to contracts, vendor records, capacity reports, pricing files, customer service histories, operational dashboards, and some financial folders. Did I have access to confidential information? Of course. Did I have access to anything I wasn't supposed to? Not that we found. Then why did the review continue? She looked down. Because Colin kept asking whether we could identify a way to determine whether documents had been copied or exported. That's different. Yes. Did he tell you why? He said he was worried you might take information when you left. When I left? Yes. So they already expected me to leave. That's what I understood. Did you ask Richard? I asked Patricia. What did she say? She said the executive team had decided that your role would be transitioned. And she knew this in September? Yes. Did she know I was going to be accused? Not then. What happened next? Rachel took a breath. The access review found nothing. I looked at Laura. She remained still. Nothing? I looked at Laura. She remained still. Nothing? I asked. Nothing indicating unauthorized copying or transfer. So the review was closed? It should have been, but it wasn't. No. Why? Rachel looked directly at me. Because Colin asked us to keep monitoring your account. For what? Anything unusual. And did anything unusual happen? Not until October. The alleged access. Yes. Who reported it? Colin. The Colin, quote, Colin. Not IT. Colin brought it to Patricia. And then Patricia asked us to open an incident. Was that before or after my MFA changed? After. Who changed my MFA? Rachel hesitated. I don't know. Did compliance request it? Not a no. Did compliance request it? Not officially. What does that mean? There was a message from Colin's office asking IT to ensure your account was secure. And then the MFA was changed. Yes. Did you know I had already been removed from remote access? Yes. Then why change MFA? I don't know. Could you see who initiated it? IT could. Did you ask? Yes. What did Mark say? Rachel's eyes shifted toward Laura. He said the change came through an administrator-level account. I felt my pulse rise. Did you see the account name? Yes. Whose? I don't want to speculate. You don't have to. It was an administrative service account, not a person's account. Correct. So you don't know who used it? No. But someone with administrative privileges changed my MFA. Yes. And then the alleged access happened. Yes. And then the alleged access happened. Yes. What did the log show? Your user ID. Anything else? The source was not clear. Not clear? There was a proxy involved. What kind? Internal. Could the source device be identified? Not conclusively. Then why was I blamed? Rachel swallowed. Because the user ID was yours. That's it? There was more. What? The files accessed were documents you had previously worked with. Which documents? She named 3 Atlas folders. I knew everyone. Capacity assumptions, implementation schedules, pricing structure. Those were my files, I said. Yes, but the files were on a shared drive. Correct. Anyone with the right permissions could access them. Correct. And my access was already being reviewed because I was leaving. Yes, so whoever accessed them knew exactly which folders would make me look guilty. Rachel didn't answer. Did you think that at the time? I thought it was suspicious. Did you tell Patricia? Yes. What did she say? Rachel looked uncomfortable. She said the investigation was not about proving intent. It was about documenting policy violation. Meaning, if your account accessed restricted documents without authorization, they could say you violated policy regardless of who was physically using the account. I leaned back. That sounds convenient. It was. Why didn't you object? I did. What happened? Patricia told me the executive team had already made a decision. What decision? Rachel looked at Laura again. That you were no longer trusted. I laughed once. They decided I couldn't be trusted before they had evidence. Rachel nodded. Yes. Then what happened? I resigned. Then what happened? I resigned. When? October 24, 4 days after I was fired. Yes. Why? Because Patricia told me to prepare a report stating that your access pattern was consistent with intentional misuse. I stared at her. Was it? No. Then why did she ask you to say that? Because that's what she wanted the report to say. Did you write it? I wrote a version. What did it say? That the logs were inconclusive. And she rejected it. What did she ask you to change? She wanted me to remove the word inconclusive and state that the activity was consistent with unauthorized access by the account holder. I looked at Laura. She was writing quickly. Did you sign it? Rachel shook her head. No. Did anyone else? Patricia signed the final version. Was your name on it? As reviewer. So it looked like you approved it. Yes. That's why you left. Yes. Rachel pushed a second document across the table. I kept this. What is it? My original draft. I read the first line. The available authentication records do not establish the identity of the individual who initiated the activity. I read it twice. This is huge. Rachel shook her head. It's important, but don't call it huge. Why? Because it's one person's assessment, but it's contemporaneous. Yes. And it contradicts the final report. Yes. Did you make this copy before you left? Yes. Was I aware of it? No. Did anyone ask you to destroy it? Not directly. Then why keep it? Rachel looked at me. Because I knew someday someone might ask me what happened. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. She hadn't kept it to become a whistleblower. She'd kept it because somewhere inside herself she knew the story wasn't right. I thanked her. She nodded. Then she said, "There's one more thing." What? The documents they said you accessed weren't the most sensitive files in the system. What were? The financial forecast folders. Did my account access those? No. Who did? She shook her head. That's not something I can tell you, because you don't know, because I shouldn't. Fair. But if you're trying to understand why they cared so much about your access, don't focus only on the files they accused you of opening. Why? Because the files you didn't open were more important. I looked at Laura. She had stopped writing. What do you mean? Rachel said the Atlas financial model was being revised repeatedly in September and October. Compliance was asked to make sure operational people couldn't see certain versions. Why? Because the assumptions were changing. Who changed them? Finance. Yes. What was wrong with them? I don't know. Then what do you know? The operational capacity numbers and the financial revenue assumptions weren't aligned. I closed my eyes. Exactly. Rachel nodded. You kept asking about that. How do you know? Your emails were included in the compliance review. So, they knew I was asking. Everyone knew. That explained more than I wanted it to. I had spent weeks thinking my questions were being ignored because executives were busy. They weren't ignoring me. They were tracking me. I looked back at the original September request. What did Colin call my role transition? Planned. Did the company have a formal succession plan? Not that I saw. Then why that phrase? Rachel shrugged. Because someone wanted a paper trail. The room went quiet. I could hear traffic outside. Somewhere in the hallway, someone laughed. It felt strange that ordinary life could continue while my entire understanding of the previous year was being rearranged. After Rachel left, Laura said, "This is the point where I need you to listen carefully." Okay, We have enough to make a serious case that the company's investigation was flawed and that your termination decision preceded the alleged misconduct. And the financial issue? We have evidence of inconsistent revenue treatment and operational assumptions, but not proof of intent. Correct. So we don't accuse them of fraud. Correct. We present the documents and let the appropriate people determine what they mean. Exactly. Who are the appropriate people? Depending on the contractual and financial structure, there may be auditors, lenders, regulators, client counsel, and eventually a court. And Atlas, if their own contract rights are implicated. So what do? We make sure the evidence reaches the right place in the right way. I nodded. And my revenge? She looked at me. You need to stop thinking of it as revenge. Why? Because if you start making decisions based on hurting them, you can destroy your own credibility. I'm not going to. Good. But I won't pretend I don't want them to suffer. You don't have to. I smiled. That's probably the most honest thing you've said to me. I'm your lawyer. I'm not supposed to make you feel better. You're doing a terrible job, she laughed. Good. The next week was the most frustrating period of the entire fight because we had information but couldn't immediately use all of it. Rachel's statement had to be reviewed. Daniel's statement had to be preserved. Mark was still unwilling to provide anything formally. Evan was under pressure. Mercer was facing Atlas problems. The lender was asking questions, yet from the outside, nothing had changed. I was still unemployed. The internet still showed no public correction. Former colleagues still whispered. One recruiter stopped responding after asking about my departure. Another told me privately that Mercer's HR department had given a not eligible for rehire response when my employment was verified. That phrase bothered me more than the firing itself. It meant the company had continued telling the story after I left. They hadn't just ended my employment, they were trying to control what happened afterward. I decided I needed a career separate from the investigation. Karen at Northline offered me a full-time position. I accepted. The salary was lower than what I had made at Mercer, but the job gave me something I'd lost, a place where nobody cared about Richard Wade's opinion of me. I spent mornings reviewing warehouse operations and afternoons building process recommendations. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking my old work email. I began noticing how much of my identity had been tied to Mercer. It was embarrassing. 8 years had made the company feel like a second home. It turned out it had only been a place where I worked. That distinction took time to sink in. Then, Mercer made its next move. My attorney received a letter accusing me of misappropriating proprietary operational knowledge in my new consulting work. Laura called me immediately. Did you take anything? No. Any files? No. Templates? No. Templates? No. Client lists? No. Client lists? No. Pricing information? No. Anything stored on your personal computer from Mercer? No. Good. Why? Because they're claiming your current work competes with their business. I laughed. My new company helps warehouses improve processes. That's not exactly proprietary. Don't joke about it. Sorry, this is a pressure tactic. To make me stop? Maybe. Or to establish a narrative that you're a disgruntled former employee using company knowledge. But they know I didn't take anything. They may not care. I realized then that the strategy was becoming clearer. If they couldn't defeat the evidence, they could attack the messenger. First, I was dishonest. Then I was unstable. Then I was unstable. Then I was vindictive. Now I was allegedly stealing their business knowledge. They were trying to make every version of me unacceptable. I asked Laura what she wanted me to do. Nothing beyond preserving your work records. Okay, and don't contact Mercer. Fine. Let me respond. She did. The response was short. It stated that my current employer had independently developed its own work product, that I had not retained Mercer property, and that any attempt to interfere with my employment would be documented. 3 days later, the accusation disappeared. No apology, no explanation, just silence. That was when I understood something about corporate power that I hadn't understood at 21 when I joined Mercer. Companies often don't need to win. They only need you to become tired. If you spend enough money defending yourself, enough hours answering accusations, enough emotional energy wondering what they're going to do next, eventually you start making decisions based on exhaustion. I decided I wasn't going to let them choose that for me. I created a separate bank account for legal expenses. I stopped buying things I didn't need. I worked overtime at Northline. I built relationships with clients. I started saving. If Mercer wanted a long fight, I was going to make sure I could afford to stay calm. Around that time, Evan made a decision that changed everything. He resigned. He didn't announce it dramatically. He simply gave his father notice. According to what he later told me to his attorney, Richard was furious. He accused Evan of abandoning the family business. Evan told him he couldn't continue signing operational certifications he didn't believe were accurate. Richard allegedly said, "You have no idea what you're doing." Evan responded, "That's why you shouldn't have put me in Jake's seat." That sentence became important later, not because it was clever, because it was true. Evan had finally realized what his promotion actually was. He wasn't being given a chance to prove himself. He was being placed into a position whose responsibilities exceeded his experience because the company needed someone who wouldn't challenge the financial assumptions. Once Evan refused to cooperate, the succession plan stopped being useful. He left 2 weeks later. His resignation letter was professional. No accusations, no threats, just a statement that the role wasn't aligned with his career goals. Richard responded by removing him from the company website within 48 hours. That was how quickly family became employment. I didn't celebrate. If anything, I felt sorry for him. He had made terrible choices, but he wasn't the architect. He had been used. The bigger question was what he had signed. Laura's answer came a few days later. "We need to know. Can he tell us? If he chooses to. Can I ask? No, I won't." Good. Will his attorney? Maybe. We waited. Then Evan's attorney, maybe. We waited. Then Evan's attorney contacted Laura. He had documents, not company files. Copies of agreements Evan had legitimately received as part of his employment, including the operational certification he had been asked to sign. The first version was dated October 20. It contained a statement that Mercer had sufficient operational capacity to fulfill the Atlas expansion. Evan had not signed it. The second version, dated October 27th, contained a different sentence. It said Mercer expected to meet the required capacity based on planned operational adjustments. Evan had signed that one. I asked Laura whether that was dangerous for him. Potentially. Could they blame him? They could try, but he was relying on information from management. That matters. What about the first version? That matters more. Why? Because it shows the company was asking him to certify something before the operational adjustments existed. I looked at the document, October 20, the same day I was fired. My replacement was being asked to certify capacity on the day he took my job. That was the moment I finally understood why Evan had called me confused. He hadn't simply inherited my responsibilities. He had inherited a problem already in motion. I asked Laura whether we could use his documents. Potentially. Will he cooperate? His attorney says he wants to protect himself. That's fair. He's not doing this for you. I know. Remember that. I do. The next month was when everything started moving at once. Atlas formally notified Mercer that it was reviewing the expansion agreement. The lender required additional financial reporting. Mercer delayed its annual performance presentation. Patricia left the company. Colin stopped responding to questions from former employees. Richard became more visible in company communications, which was strange because he had spent years avoiding operational detail. Then an industry newsletter published a small piece about Mercer losing an expected expansion with a major client. My name wasn't mentioned, neither was the internal dispute. But the article said the company was reassessing its growth assumptions. That phrase sounded familiar. I read it twice. Mercer was finally saying publicly what I had been warning them about privately. The growth assumptions were wrong, and because they were wrong, the financial story they had built around them was starting to collapse. A week later, Laura called me. They made an offer. Another one? Yes. How much? She told me. It was enough to make my hands go cold. It would have paid off my remaining debts, covered my legal expenses, and left me with enough savings to stop worrying for a while. What do they want? Confidential settlement, mutual non-disparagement, no admission of wrongdoing, withdrawal of certain claims, and my termination record, they'll amend it. To what? File amend it? To what? Voluntary separation. I laughed. That's ridiculous. I know. But tempting. Yes. What would you do? I'd ask what you want your life to look like 5 years from now. Without Mercer? Definitely. Then why fight? Because sometimes money solves the immediate problem and leaves the underlying problem intact. I knew what she meant. If I signed, Mercer could say we had resolved a disagreement. My reputation might improve quietly. I'd get money. They'd get silence. The financial issue would continue. The people who created it would remain in control. I asked Laura, can I counter? Yes. I want the termination record corrected. That's reasonable. I want a written statement saying there was no finding that I stole or disclosed confidential information. Reasonable. I want them to preserve all records related to the investigation. They'll resist. Then let them. Anything else? I thought about it. I want the right to cooperate with any lawful investigation or request for information. Laura smiled. That will be the hardest one. Then that's the one I care about. I thought so. We sent the counter-proposal. Mercer rejected it within hours. They said they were not prepared to make any admission or provide any statement regarding the circumstances of separation. The money remained on the table, but the conditions became worse. They wanted me silent. That was when I stopped considering the settlement. Not because I didn't need the money, I did, but because I realized the offer wasn't really about compensating me. It was about buying the one thing they were afraid of: silence. I told Laura I was declining. She said, "Okay." Then she added, "You understand what that means." Yes, the fight gets longer, I know, and more expensive. I know, and more expensive. I know, and there may be no clean ending. I know. She paused. Then we're ready. The next stage was not dramatic. It was paperwork, lots of it. Requests for records, preservation notices, employment documents, security policies, access logs, financial schedules, communications relevant to the decision surrounding my termination. It was tedious, but it was also where the company started making mistakes. Different departments produced documents with different versions of the same story. HR said my role was eliminated due to misconduct. Finance described my responsibilities as reassigned as part of strategic restructuring. Operations described Evan as interim successor. Compliance referred to an ongoing security investigation. None of the explanations lined up perfectly. That mattered. We weren't looking for a single smoking gun anymore. We were building a pattern of contradictions. One of the most important documents came from a routine HR file. It was an internal email from Denise, the HR manager, to Richard dated October 17. The subject line was Transition Communications. It said, "Assuming tomorrow's meeting proceeds as planned, Evan should receive his revised role description immediately afterward." The email had been sent before I was formally interviewed about the alleged misconduct. I stared at the timestamp. October 17, 4:32 p.m. The company said the investigation into my access had been ongoing and that the termination decision came after review. But HR had already prepared Evan's role description the day before my termination. Laura said, "This is useful." How useful? Very. Because it shows they planned the transition. Yes, but not necessarily that they planned the accusation. Correct. Rachel's document covers that. Exactly. I started to see the structure of the case. We didn't need to prove every person had conspired in every step. We needed to establish the sequence. My role was targeted first. My credentials were reviewed first. The financial problem existed first. The alleged access happened afterward. The investigation relied on incomplete evidence. The company changed its explanation after being challenged, and the person who replaced me was asked to certify the very operational assumptions I had questioned. That was enough to make the story difficult to defend. Then Mark finally broke his silence. He didn't contact me directly. His attorney contacted Laura. Mark was willing to provide a declaration, not because he wanted to attack Mercer. He wanted to correct the record. His declaration said he had disabled my remote access on October 16th. He confirmed that an administrator-level service account initiated an MFA change later that night. He stated that the authentication logs did not establish that I personally performed the activity attributed to my account. He also stated that IT had been asked to preserve logs associated with my user ID before Mercer formally notified me of the investigation. That last point was devastating. The company had preserved evidence before telling me what I was accused of. That could be completely legitimate if they were investigating. But combined with everything else, it raised the obvious question. What had they already decided? We didn't need to ask it publicly. The documents asked it for us. Mercer responded aggressively. Their attorneys argued that Mark's declaration was based on incomplete information and that he had misunderstood the security architecture. They produced a technical explanation saying the MFA change was routine and that an authenticated session could have been initiated from a device associated with my credentials. Laura sent the explanation to an independent cybersecurity consultant. The consultant wasn't there to prove a crime. He was there to answer a narrow question. Did the company's technical explanation establish that I personally performed the access? His answer was no. It established that my credentials were associated with the activity. It did not identify the human being behind the activity. That distinction became the center of the dispute. Mercer had accused me of conduct. Their evidence identified an account. Those were not the same thing. The company then tried another tactic. They argued that even if I hadn't personally accessed the files, I had failed to protect my credentials. I asked Laura whether that mattered. It could, but they changed my MFA. Yes. After disabling my access. Yes. So they're saying I failed to protect credentials they had already taken control of. That's the argument. That's a bird. Don't say absurd in writing. I smiled. Noted. We eventually learned that the service account used for the MFA change had been accessible to a small group of IT administrators and a compliance automation process. We didn't know who had physically initiated the change. That remained unresolved, but we no longer needed to prove who did it to undermine the certainty of the company's accusation. The company had claimed certainty. The evidence showed uncertainty. That difference mattered. Around the same time, Atlas hired an outside firm to review the expansion dispute. We weren't involved. We didn't know exactly what they found. But Evan told Laura through his attorney that Atlas had requested copies of capacity projections and asked why the financial assumptions had been classified as committed before the operational validation was complete. Mercer had no satisfying answer. Colin's position became increasingly difficult. The lender also began asking questions about the timing of revenue recognition. Again, I was careful not to speculate about whether anyone had committed a crime. I wasn't qualified to make that determination. What I knew was that the same numbers I questioned internally were now being questioned externally by people who had no emotional attachment to Mercer. That was important. The truth didn't need me to carry it. It only needed the right people to look at it. Then came the betrayal. It came from someone I had trusted. Mike called me one evening and said, "I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." Okay, I gave Mercer a statement. My stomach dropped. About what? About your access. What did you say? That you had broad permissions and knew where the files were. That's true. I also said you were technically capable of accessing them remotely. That's also true. I didn't say you did. Okay, but their lawyer asked whether I thought you could have done it. And you said? I said yes. I was quiet. Mike, why? Because I didn't want to lie. You didn't have to lie. I know. You could have said you didn't know. I panicked. Did they pressure you? Not directly. Then why? Because I'm still working there. That answer hurt more than I expected. I understand. I'm sorry. I know. I didn't want to hurt you. You did. He went silent. I'm not angry, I said, but I'm disappointed. Fair. Did they ask you anything else? Whether you had ever taken company information home? What did you say? I said you sometimes worked from home. I did, and that you used company documents. Of course, I didn't say you copied anything. Okay, does that make a difference? It might. I'm sorry. I know. We hung up. For the first time since this began, I felt genuinely alone. Not because Mike's statement destroyed anything. It didn't. It was technically accurate. But I had believed that if someone knew me well enough, they'd automatically know I couldn't have done it. That was naive. People don't testify from friendship. They testify from what they remember, what they can prove, and what protects them. I wrote that down because it was another lesson I needed to learn. Loyalty wasn't evidence. Documentation was. A few days later, Mercer filed a motion seeking to limit certain claims in my case. Laura warned me it was normal litigation strategy. I still hated seeing my name in legal documents. The company described me as a former employee whose allegations were speculative and motivated by resentment. I read the sentence 3 times. It wasn't technically surprising. It still felt like someone had taken everything that happened and reduced it to an adjective. Resentful. That was the word they wanted attached to me. I decided to stop fighting that word. Maybe I was resentful. I was. Anyone who said otherwise would be lying. But resentment didn't create the documents. Resentment didn't create the dates. Resentment didn't create the dates. Resentment didn't change the financial records. Resentment didn't alter the access logs. My feelings could be real without making the facts false. That became my anchor. I didn't need to prove I was emotionally pure. I needed to prove what happened. The court process moved slowly, much slower than Reddit stories make it sound. There were delays, scheduling disputes, requests for extensions, arguments over documents. Some days nothing happened. Other days, a single email changed the direction of everything. One such email came from Patricia's former deputy, Rachel. She had received another document from her old personal records. It was a meeting invitation from September 9. The title was Operational Transition Atlas. The attendees were Richard, Colin, Patricia, Evan, and me. I had been invited. I had never attended because the meeting was scheduled for 7:00 a.m. before my flight to Dayton. I had declined the invitation. The meeting occurred anyway. The calendar entry included a note added by Colin. Need agreement on timing and access before operational handoff. I stared at that line. Timing and access. Before I was fired. Before the alleged security violation. The meeting wasn't proof of a conspiracy, but it was another piece of the sequence. Then I noticed something else. The meeting had originally been scheduled for September 6 and moved to September 9th. The September 6 version included only Richard, Colin, and Patricia. Evan was added when the meeting was rescheduled. I asked Laura what she thought. They were discussing the transition before Evan was even involved, so the son wasn't the original reason. Probably not. What was? The business problem. I nodded. That was the turning point. Evan wasn't the cause. He was the solution they chose after deciding I was inconvenient. That distinction mattered. It made the story bigger than nepotism. The nepotism was simply the mechanism. The real motive was control. They needed someone in my position who wouldn't challenge the numbers. Evan happened to be available and loyal to his father. I was neither. Around Christmas, I received a message from Evan. I know I shouldn't contact you, but I need to tell you something. I didn't answer immediately. Then he sent another message. I found out why they wanted you gone. I stared at the screen. Laura's instructions echoed in my head. Don't contact him. Don't solicit confidential information. Let him choose his own counsel. I replied with one sentence. Please have your attorney contact mine. He responded, okay. 2 days later, Laura received a package from Evan's lawyer. Inside was a copy of a presentation Evan had been given during his transition. It was a management briefing titled 2025 Operating Reset. The presentation described the Atlas expansion as a critical component of the company's financial stabilization plan. It also stated that legacy operational leadership has been resistant to required changes. There was no name, but the context was obvious. I had been the legacy operational leadership. The presentation recommended leadership realignment before the Atlas contract was finalized. That document was dated September 12, 3 days after the meeting where Richard had supposedly discussed my succession. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was worse in a way. It was ordinary. It looked like a management document. No villainous language, no confession, just careful corporate phrasing describing the removal of the person who kept asking uncomfortable questions. That was how organizations protect themselves. They don't write "get rid of Jake" because he knows too much. They write "leadership realignment to support strategic execution." The meaning only becomes clear when you line up the documents. And now we had enough documents to do that. Laura began assembling a chronology for our legal team. It ran 26 pages. Every date had a source. Every claim had a document or witness. If we didn't know something, it was labeled unknown, no speculation, no adjectives, no accusations that weren't supported. I read the chronology twice. At the end, I realized something. The strongest revenge I could have wasn't going to be a dramatic confrontation. It was going to be making the truth impossible to dismiss. Richard could call me bitter. Colin could call me incompetent. Patricia could say I misunderstood security procedures. They could all argue about my character, but they couldn't change 26 pages of dates. They couldn't move September after October. They couldn't make a contract signed on October 28 appear signed on October 13. They couldn't make a financial forecast accurate because they wanted it to be. They couldn't turn an administrator-level credential change into proof that I personally accessed anything. The facts were beginning to work without me. Then the company made its biggest mistake. They released an internal memo to employees about the Atlas situation. It said the company had experienced temporary delays due to inaccurate legacy operational assumptions. Everyone who had worked with me knew what that meant. It was an attempt to blame the old model. But the old model had been mine, and the revised model had been theirs. The memo effectively admitted that the company was changing its explanation. One of my former co-workers sent me a screenshot. I didn't respond. I sent it to Laura. She replied within minutes. This is useful because they're blaming my model, because the document establishes that management knew the operational assumptions had changed, and it helps establish that your concerns were legitimate. Can we use it if properly authenticated? How? The employee who sent it may be able to confirm where it came from. I won't contact them. Good. 2 weeks later, the employee's attorney contacted Laura. He was willing to confirm the memo. He also had an earlier version. The earlier version said the company had approved a revised operational model in September. The final version said the company had identified inaccuracies in legacy assumptions. Two different stories, one internal, one external, both couldn't be true in the same way. That was when the company finally started losing control of its own narrative. They had spent months trying to make me the problem. Now every attempt to explain the business problem created another document that contradicted the previous explanation. Richard called me again. This time I answered. Jake, Richard, we need to talk. About the litigation. Okay, I think this has gone too far. I agree. This has gone too far. I agree. We can still resolve it. What changed? The company has been through a difficult period. That's not what I asked. I'm trying to protect the business. You should have thought about that before firing me. He sighed. You don't understand everything that was happening. Then explain it. I can't. Why? Because there are confidential matters. That's convenient. Jake, did you know about the financial pressure? Silence. Did you know Atlas was being counted on before the contract was signed? Silence. Did you know my credentials were being reviewed in September? I knew there was a security review. Did you know my role was being transitioned? We were discussing restructuring. Before the access incident, he didn't answer. Richard? Yes. You once told me that if you can't explain a decision to the person affected by it, you probably shouldn't make the decision. He sighed. I remember. Do you still believe that? Some things are more complicated than that. No, they're not. You want me to admit something I can't admit. I want you to stop pretending I don't know what happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What do you want? Nothing from you. Then why are you doing this? I looked out my apartment window. Because you tried to erase me. That's not what happened. Maybe that's not what you intended. It wasn't, but that's what happened. Jake, I'm not trying to get my job back. I know. I'm not trying to take your company. I know. I'm trying to make sure you can't do this to someone else. He didn't answer. That's all. You think you're helping people? I think I'm correcting the record. And if the company suffers, that's not my decision. You know people will lose jobs. That stopped me. I know. Families. I know. Families. I know. Suppliers. I know. You're willing to risk all that? I thought about it. No. He seemed surprised. Then stop. I can't. Why? Because stopping now doesn't undo what happened. We can compensate you. You already offered. More. That's not the point. Then what is? You still think this is about me. Silence. It isn't. He finally said, You're making a mistake. Maybe. You don't know what happens when the company loses control. Neither did you when you started this. He hung up. I sat there for a while afterward. I had expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. His arguments about employees stayed with me. If Mercer collapsed completely, innocent people would suffer. Warehouse workers, account managers, drivers, people who had nothing to do with what Richard and Colin had done. I didn't want revenge to become collateral damage, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to attack Mercer. I wasn't going to leak documents. I wasn't going to contact customers. I wasn't going to post allegations. I would cooperate with lawful processes and let the people responsible for evaluating the company decide what happened next. That was the line I drew. I could pursue my case. I could tell the truth. I could protect my reputation, but I wouldn't become the thing they had accused me of being. The final stage began quietly. The lender requested a deeper review. Atlas formally disputed portions of the expansion. The company's outside auditors asked questions about revenue assumptions. Colin resigned before the review was completed. Patricia was already gone. Richard remained. Evan was working elsewhere. The company's board appointed an interim financial advisor. That was when I realized the people who had controlled everything were losing control one at a time. None of it happened because I destroyed them. It happened because the decisions they made eventually reached people who weren't obligated to believe them. The lender didn't care about my personality. Atlas didn't care whether Richard thought I was loyal. Auditors didn't care whether I was resentful. They cared about documents, dates, contracts, numbers, capacity, and those things didn't line up. One morning, Laura called me and said, "They've agreed to correct your employment record." I was silent. "Jake, what does it say?" "It says the company found insufficient evidence to substantiate allegations that you intentionally removed or disclosed confidential information." I closed my eyes. That's enough. There's more. What? They'll also issue a neutral reference. Good. And there's a financial settlement. How much? She told me. It was less than their first offer, but still significant. What do they want? Confidentiality regarding the settlement itself, not a blanket restriction on lawful cooperation, and the investigation. They've agreed to preserve and produce relevant records. Do I have to sign? No. I thought about it. I want the record corrected. It will be. Then I'll sign. You're sure? Yes. Why? Because I'm done fighting about whether I stole something. She smiled. That's a good reason. I signed the agreement, but the corporate investigation continued independently. That was important. My case had reached a resolution. The larger problem hadn't. 3 months later, I learned what happened to Richard. He didn't go to prison. He wasn't dragged out of an office in handcuffs. He resigned as CEO after the board concluded that the company's financial reporting and operational planning required significant leadership changes. Colin's resignation became effective earlier. Patricia was no longer with the company. The board brought in a restructuring team. Atlas reduced its expansion commitment. The lender renegotiated certain terms. Mercer survived, but it was a much smaller company. Several people lost their jobs. That part never felt satisfying. I knew some of them. I knew warehouse supervisors who had nothing to do with the decisions. I knew account managers who had been caught in the middle. Revenge stories make consequences look clean. Real consequences aren't. They spread. That's why I never celebrated the layoffs. The people responsible lost their positions and reputations. The people who weren't responsible had to rebuild too. Evan called me once after everything settled. You were right, he said. About what? I wasn't ready. You weren't. My dad said you were impossible to manage. I laughed. I was probably annoying. You were. Thanks. But you were usually right. Usually, don't push it. We both laughed. Then he said, I found the old capacity model. Where? In the transition folder. Why? Why? Because I wanted to understand what happened. And your numbers were right. I didn't know what to say. You should have been there, he said. No. What? I shouldn't have. What? I shouldn't have. Why? Because I wouldn't have learned what I know now if I had stayed. He was quiet. Are you happier? Yeah. Good. I'm figuring it out. We talked for another 20 minutes. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no apology speech. He didn't ask me to forgive his father. I didn't ask him to choose sides. When we hung up, I realized I no longer thought of him as the person who took my job. He was just a young guy who had accepted an opportunity without understanding what it cost someone else. That distinction mattered. It let me move on. The final piece came almost a year after my firing. I was at Northline full-time by then. I had been promoted to Operations Strategy Manager, which still made me laugh because I had once believed titles were proof of security. My boss there cared about whether I solved problems, not whether I attended the right executive meetings. I had started mentoring 2 younger employees. I told him something I wish I'd understood at 21. Never confuse being valuable with being protected. I received an email from a former Mercer employee one afternoon. It was short. They're replacing the old executive team. Thought you'd want to know. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By then, my name had been cleared. My professional references were clean. The accusation no longer followed me. Recruiters stopped asking about it. My career had recovered. Not instantly. Not magically. It took months of explaining the situation, providing neutral documentation, and accepting that some employers would believe Mercer anyway. But eventually, enough people judged me on my work instead of the accusation. That was the real victory. Not the settlement, not Richard's resignation, not Colin's departure, not the collapse of the Atlas expansion. It was the first time I walked into a new company and nobody knew who Richard Wade was. Nobody cared. They only knew what I could do, and that was strangely freeing. A few weeks later, I drove past Mercer's old headquarters on my way to a client meeting. I hadn't planned it. The building looked exactly the same. Same glass entrance, same parking lot, same sign. For a second, I remembered sitting in that conference room while HR put the termination letter in front of me. I remembered Evan standing outside with the box I'd packed. I remembered the feeling of realizing that the last 8 years of my life could be dismissed in one afternoon. Then I kept driving. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The people who had tried to erase me had spent months trying to make me prove that I wasn't the person they said I was. In the end, I didn't have to become louder, richer, smarter, or more powerful than them. I only had to keep the facts straight long enough for the facts to outlast their story. And that was the part I understood too late. They thought firing me would remove the person who knew how the company worked. What it actually removed was the one person still willing to believe the company was worth saving. For a long time after that, I thought the story was over, not because everything had been fixed, and definitely not because I felt like I had won, but because I had finally reached the point where waking up in the morning didn't begin with wondering what Mercer had done next. That was a bigger change than I expected. For almost a year, every notification had carried the possibility of another accusation, another letter from an attorney, another former coworker telling me something I didn't want to know, or another reminder that the company I had given 8 years of my life to had decided I was disposable. Then, slowly, the notifications became ordinary again. A client asking about a project, my manager asking if I could review a process map, a friend sending me a stupid video, my mother asking whether I was coming over Sunday. Normal things, boring things, things I used to take for granted. I started realizing how much of my life had been consumed by something that, in the beginning, had lasted less than an hour. The actual firing meeting had been maybe 35 minutes. 35 minutes to end 8 years. 35 minutes to turn a promotion history into a security investigation. 35 minutes to make people who had worked beside me wonder whether they'd ever really known me. And yet the consequences of those 35 minutes lasted long enough that I sometimes wondered whether the company had understood that better than I did. Maybe that was why they had chosen the accusation they did. Stealing confidential information wasn't just a policy violation, it was a character judgment. If they'd fired me for poor performance, I could have defended my numbers. If they'd fired me for restructuring, I could have found another job. But they accused me of taking something that didn't belong to me. That made every future employer wonder whether there was something wrong with me that couldn't be measured on a performance review. I understood that now. What I didn't understand at the time was how difficult it would be to separate myself from the version of me they had created. Even after the employment record was corrected, I had moments where I felt like I was waiting for someone to discover that I wasn't actually cleared. I would sit in an interview and hear the words, "Why did you leave Mercer?" and feel my shoulders tighten before I answered. There was a dispute over an internal security investigation. The company ultimately found insufficient evidence to substantiate the allegations. That sentence had become rehearsed. I hated that. I wanted to be able to say I left because I wanted something new. I wanted the boring answer, but the truth was the truth, and eventually I stopped being embarrassed by it. I also stopped trying to convince everyone. That was another lesson. If someone heard the facts and still decided I was guilty, there wasn't a magical sentence that would change their mind. I couldn't control that. What I could control was the quality of my work. At Northline, I started taking on bigger projects. The company had grown faster than its processes could handle, which meant I was back in familiar territory. Inventory mismatches, inconsistent vendor scheduling, warehouse bottlenecks, managers using different spreadsheets for the same numbers, and executives making decisions based on reports nobody trusted. The first time I saw 3 departments using 3 different versions of the same forecast, I almost laughed. Karen caught me staring at the files. Don't. I didn't say anything. Your face did. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. It's not that bad. You said that about Mercer. I looked at her. She immediately regretted the joke. Sorry, it's okay. She sat beside me. You know, that's probably the first time I've seen you get quiet about something that isn't work. What do you mean? You used to talk about Mercer like it was a person. I smiled. Maybe I did. You trusted it. I trusted the people. Same thing. I thought so. She shook her head. It isn't. I looked back at the spreadsheet. I'm learning. She left me alone. That afternoon, I rebuilt the forecasting process from scratch, not because anyone had asked me to, but because I finally understood that systems shouldn't depend on one person remembering everything. At Mercer, I had carried too much in my head. I knew which client would accept a 2-day delay, which vendor needed 3 phone calls before confirming a shipment, which warehouse manager always underestimated weekend labor, which contract clause would become a problem 6 months later. That knowledge had made me valuable. It had also made me vulnerable. When they wanted me gone, they had to construct a story around the fact that they couldn't easily replace what I knew. At Northline, I started documenting everything. Not because I was paranoid, because I didn't want anyone to become irreplaceable simply because nobody else knew what they knew. I built procedures. I trained people. I created backups. I wrote explanations for decisions that would otherwise exist only in someone's memory. It was one of the healthiest changes I'd made in my career. A year after the Mercer settlement, Northline offered me a new position overseeing operations strategy across 3 regions. The raise was good. The title was good. But what mattered to me was the conversation with Karen. She said, "I don't want you because you're the only person who can do this." I looked at her. "Then why?" "Because you know how to build a system that doesn't collapse when one person leaves." That sentence hit me harder than any compliment I'd received at Mercer. I accepted. The following months were busy. I traveled more. I worked with managers in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas. I saw different versions of the same problems I'd spent years solving. Sometimes I caught myself slipping into the old habit of fixing everything personally. Then I'd stop and ask who else could learn the process. That became my rule. If I solved the same problem twice, I documented it. If someone else could solve it, I taught them. If a number didn't make sense, I asked where it came from before deciding what it meant. That last habit probably came from Mercer more than anything else. I no longer trusted a clean spreadsheet just because it looked clean. I wanted to know the assumptions underneath it. One evening, almost 18 months after the firing, I got an email from Daniel. The subject line said only, "Thought you should know." I opened it. Mercer is being acquired. I stared at the screen. I knew the company had been struggling, but I hadn't expected an acquisition. Daniel said the buyer was a larger logistics services company that wanted Mercer's regional contracts and warehouse network. The acquisition would involve restructuring. Several executives were leaving. Some employees were being retained. Others weren't. The email ended with, "They're cleaning out old records as part of the transition." I wrote back, "Why are you telling me?" He replied, "Because your name is in some of them." My first reaction was annoyance. I didn't want to be pulled back in. I had spent months building a life that didn't revolve around Mercer. I called Laura. She said, "Don't respond to Daniel." I already did. "What did you say?" "Nothing substantive." "Good. He says my name is in records they're cleaning out. Then we need to preserve anything relevant before the acquisition is completed." Why? Because corporate transitions can complicate access to records. Do we still need them? Maybe not for your case. But if there are unresolved regulatory or contractual issues, preservation matters. Okay, I almost forgot about it. Then 2 weeks later, Laura called again. "We have a problem." "What kind?" "Mercer's new counsel is claiming certain historical records are unavailable." "Which records?" "The original financial forecast versions." My stomach tightened. "The ones from September and October?" "Yes." "How?" "They say they were part of a discontinued reporting system." "That's convenient." "Very. Can they just delete them?" "Not if they're subject to a preservation obligation." "So what happens?" "We ask for them formally. And if they say they don't have them, then we ask what happened to them. And if they really don't, then we document that too." I had learned by then not to panic when someone said a document was missing. Missing records could mean anything. Sometimes a system really had been retired. Sometimes someone had failed to preserve something. Sometimes the record existed somewhere else. The key was not to assume. Laura's team requested the records. Mercer's new counsel responded that they had made reasonable efforts to locate them. They couldn't produce the original versions, but they produced a backup export. It contained metadata. The original financial model had been modified repeatedly. The changes were time-stamped. One of the most significant changes occurred on September 14th, 2 days after the management presentation recommending leadership realignment. The change increased projected Atlas revenue and reduced the operational reserve required to support it. The model now made the company look healthier. But the operational assumptions didn't change. The numbers had been stretched to fit the financial story. I didn't need to interpret that. An independent accountant did. The accountant's report was careful. It did not say fraud. It said the assumptions were aggressive and insufficiently supported by contemporaneous operational data. That phrase was enough. The buyer requested further clarification. The acquisition price was renegotiated. Richard's remaining financial interests were reduced. Several former executives were required to provide additional information. Colin's name appeared repeatedly. Patricia's name appeared less often. My name appeared as the operations director whose objections had preceded the revisions. I wasn't the center of the story anymore. I was evidence of what had happened before the numbers changed. That was strangely satisfying. The person they had tried to portray as a problem had become the person whose records helped explain the problem. I received one final communication from Richard through his attorney. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. He wrote that he regretted the breakdown in trust that occurred during a difficult period. That phrase made me laugh. Breakdown in trust. He still couldn't say what he had done. He couldn't say he was sorry for accusing me. He couldn't say he had been wrong. He could only describe the consequences as if they had happened between two equal parties. I didn't respond. Laura asked whether I wanted to. No. Sure. Yes. Why? Because there's nothing he can say now that I need. She nodded. That was the last time Richard tried to contact me. I never heard from him again. Months later, I learned through industry contacts that he had taken a consulting role with a smaller company. Apparently, he had told people that Mercer had been a victim of market timing and internal politics. Maybe that was how he needed to remember it. I didn't care anymore. Colin had a harder time. His name had become associated with the financial reporting decisions, and he struggled to find another executive role. He eventually joined a private company as a finance advisor, but the position didn't last. I don't know exactly why. I didn't investigate. I had stopped wanting to know. Patricia moved to another state and worked in compliance consulting. Rachel, the woman who had kept the original draft, eventually became an independent compliance consultant. We stayed in occasional contact. She told me once that the experience had changed how she approached investigations. I don't let people tell me what the conclusion is before I see the evidence anymore, she said. Good, I replied. That's the whole lesson. Maybe. She laughed. You know, you still sound like an operations director. Occupational hazard. Mike remained at Mercer through the transition. We never became close again. There was no dramatic reconciliation. He had betrayed my trust, even if he hadn't intended to. But years later, when we ran into each other at an industry conference, he bought me a beer. We talked for 20 minutes. He apologized again. This time, I believed him. Not because the apology fixed anything, but because he wasn't asking me for anything. He didn't want forgiveness. He just wanted to acknowledge what he'd done. I told him I appreciated it. Then we talked about sports. It was surprisingly normal. That's another thing revenge stories don't always show. Sometimes, people don't get permanently destroyed. Sometimes, relationships just change shape. Some people leave your life. Some come back differently. Some stay exactly where they were. The only person who really needed to change was me. I had spent years believing that loyalty was a kind of insurance. I thought if I worked hard enough, solved enough problems, stayed late enough, and made enough sacrifices, the company would eventually recognize that I was worth protecting. I wasn't completely wrong. Good companies do value people. Good managers do reward performance. But there is a dangerous gap between being valuable and being safe. A company can value your work and still choose the easiest political option when money gets tight. A boss can appreciate you and still protect his family first. A coworker can like you and still say something damaging because they're afraid of losing their own job. None of that means hard work is pointless. It means hard work isn't a contract. I wish I'd understood that sooner. The strange part is that I don't hate Mercer. I expected to. For a while, I thought I did. But hate takes energy, and eventually I didn't want to spend any more of mine on that building. I drove past it one last time about 2 years after my firing. The old sign was gone. The new company had replaced it. Different logo, different name, same building, same glass doors. I parked across the street for a few minutes. I could see people going in and out. Some were carrying laptops. Someone was holding a coffee. A delivery driver pushed a cart toward the loading area. For a moment, I could almost imagine my old routine. Badge in, coffee, check overnight emails, review warehouse numbers, call a client, walk through operations, lunch at my desk, meeting with Richard, drive home, repeat. It had once felt permanent. Now it looked like a set from a life I used to live. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt something closer to gratitude, which surprised me. Not gratitude for what they did. I would never be grateful for being falsely accused. I was grateful for what the experience forced me to learn. Before Mercer, I thought my career was something other people could give me or take away. After Mercer, I understood that a job was one chapter of a career, not the career itself. I had spent 8 years building expertise, but I had mistakenly attached that expertise to one company. They could take the badge, they could take the office, they could take the office, they could even damage my reputation for a while. But they couldn't take what I knew unless I let them convince me I was nothing without them. That was the real thing they had underestimated. They thought firing me would make me desperate. It did for a while. They thought the accusation would make me defensive. It did. They thought I would spend my life trying to get my job back. I almost did. But somewhere between the first document Rachel gave us and the last correction to my employment record, I stopped wanting anything from Mercer. I wanted my name back. Once I had it, there was nothing left to win. People sometimes ask me whether I'd do it differently if I could go back. The honest answer is yes. I would have documented more. I would have asked harder questions earlier. I would have separated company loyalty from personal identity. I would have noticed that the September meeting invitation wasn't normal. I would have paid attention when Evan started being included in meetings that had nothing to do with his experience. I would have asked why finance needed operational certifications before operations had validated the capacity. I would have trusted the numbers less and the underlying assumptions more. Most of all, I would have understood that when a company suddenly becomes interested in your access, your permissions, and what happens to your knowledge after you leave, that's not always routine security housekeeping. Sometimes it's a sign that someone has already decided you're leaving. But I also know I couldn't have discovered everything at the beginning. That's the part that used to bother me. I would replay conversations in my head and imagine different versions where I asked the perfect question and prevented everything. That's fantasy. Real life doesn't work like that. Sometimes the information you need doesn't exist yet. Sometimes people lie. Sometimes people don't know the truth themselves. Sometimes you only understand the meaning of a conversation after 6 other events happen. The goal isn't to become someone who can predict betrayal. The goal is to become someone who can survive it without losing himself. I think I finally did that. There was one final irony I didn't expect. About 3 years after I left Mercer, Northline asked me to lead a project involving a company that was considering a major expansion. The executives wanted to present optimistic projections to the board. The numbers looked good. Too good. I recognized the pattern immediately. I asked the operations team to validate the assumptions. They came back with a problem. The expansion would require more labor and warehouse capacity than the financial model assumed. I presented the discrepancy to the executive team. There was a long silence. One executive said, "Can we just adjust the operational assumption?" I looked at him. "No." He smiled. "Why not?" I said. "Because then we're not forecasting. We're decorating." Nobody laughed. I thought about Mercer. I thought about Richard. I thought about Colin. I thought about the September spreadsheet that had looked perfect because somebody had changed the numbers instead of changing reality. We rebuilt the model. The project was delayed by 6 months. The board approved it anyway because the revised numbers were honest. We made less money in the short term. We avoided a much bigger problem later. My boss told me afterward, "You probably saved us a fortune." I shrugged. "That's the job." He said, "No, that's judgment." I carried that sentence with me. Maybe that was what Mercer had actually taught me. Not how to run warehouses, not how to manage contracts, not how to read operational reports. Judgment. The ability to sit with incomplete information and resist the temptation to believe the easiest story. The ability to distinguish between what you know, what you suspect, and what you can prove. The ability to let evidence move slowly when emotions want to move fast. That's what saved me. Not revenge, not anger, not intelligence. Patience. The strangest thing about the whole experience is that the people who tried to destroy my career were never as powerful as I thought they were. I had given them too much power because they had titles. Richard had been CEO. Colin controlled finance. Patricia controlled compliance. HR controlled my employment record. Together, they seemed untouchable, but their power depended on everyone accepting their version of events. Once enough people started asking independent questions, the illusion weakened. The lender didn't accept their numbers automatically. Atlas didn't accept their explanation automatically. The board didn't accept their assurances automatically. Auditors didn't accept their assurances automatically. My attorney didn't accept their accusations automatically. Rachel didn't accept Patricia's conclusion automatically. Rachel didn't accept Patricia's conclusion automatically. Mark didn't accept the idea that a user ID proved who had acted. Evan eventually stopped accepting his father's explanation automatically, and I stopped accepting my own assumption that Mercer was the center of my future. That was why the whole thing eventually collapsed. Not because I was some mastermind sitting at home with a wall covered in photographs and red string. I wasn't. I was a 29-year-old guy who got fired, got scared, hired a lawyer, kept records, asked questions, and refused to let somebody else's accusation become his identity. That's much less exciting than the version people want to hear. It's also the truth. The most brutal part of the revenge wasn't watching Richard lose his job. It wasn't seeing Colin's reputation damaged. It wasn't watching the company restructure. It wasn't even receiving the corrected employment record. The most brutal part for them was that the story they had created stopped working. They had accused me of stealing confidential information. In the end, the evidence showed they couldn't establish that I had done it. They had implied I was unstable and resentful. The documents showed I had raised legitimate operational concerns before my firing. They had positioned Evan as my replacement. The records showed the succession planning began before the alleged misconduct. They had described the financial problems as unexpected. The timeline showed the concerns existed before the public explanation. They had tried to make me look like the disgruntled former employee who couldn't accept being replaced. Instead, the record showed that I had been removed while questioning assumptions the company later had to defend to outside parties. They didn't lose because I outsmarted them. They lost because they told different versions of the story to different people, and eventually, those versions collided. That's what made the revenge feel earned. I didn't have to invent consequences. I didn't have to threaten anyone. I didn't have to destroy anyone's life. I simply stopped protecting the people who had decided protecting themselves was more important than telling the truth. There is a difference. I didn't expose private information that didn't belong in the process. I didn't leak confidential documents to the internet. I didn't call clients and tell them what I thought. I didn't hack anything. I didn't break into systems. I didn't follow people home. I didn't even confront Richard in person after that first conversation. I let the evidence go where it needed to go. That was the hardest form of revenge for me because it required restraint. When you're angry, you want immediate results. You want the person who hurt you to know that you know. You want them to feel the same panic you felt. But immediate revenge is usually emotional. Strategic accountability is slower. It gives the other side time to make mistakes. It gives facts time to accumulate. It gives independent people time to see the pattern. And most importantly, it keeps you from becoming the villain in your own story. I don't know what happened to the original termination letter. I kept a copy for years. Eventually, I put it in a box with old tax documents, apartment leases, and a few photographs from my early 20s. I hadn't looked at it in years. One Sunday, while cleaning my apartment, I found it. I opened the folder and read it again. The language was cold. Immediate termination. Violation of confidentiality policies. Unauthorized access. Company property. Final determination. I remembered how heavy that paper had felt. At 29, I had looked at those words and thought they described the rest of my life. They didn't. They described one afternoon. That's all. One afternoon, I folded the letter back up. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I didn't frame it. I put it back in the box. Some things don't need dramatic endings. They just need to stop controlling you. I thought about the opening moment, sitting in Richard's office while HR placed the termination document in front of me. At the time, I had noticed Evan outside the glass wall with a cardboard box. That image had haunted me because it made everything feel predetermined. I thought I was looking at the end of my career. I wasn't. I was looking at the end of a version of my life. The person who walked into that office believed that hard work guaranteed loyalty. The person who walked out believed something different. Hard work matters. Loyalty matters. Trust matters. But none of them replace judgment. None of them replace dodgemanship. None of them mean another person will make the same ethical choice you would make. That's a difficult lesson to learn because it makes the world feel less safe. But eventually, it makes you stronger. I still work in operations. I still spend too much time looking at spreadsheets. I still get irritated when someone sends me a forecast without assumptions attached. I still make coffee before checking email. I still sometimes work late. The difference is that now, when someone tells me a number, I ask where it came from. When someone tells me a decision is final, I ask when it was made. When someone tells me a person is the problem, I ask what evidence supports that. And when someone says, "Don't worry, we've got it handled," I pay closer attention than I used to. I don't think everyone is secretly plotting against me. That's not the lesson. The lesson is simpler. People are people. Companies are collections of people. Good people make mistakes. Bad people sometimes make good decisions. Good companies can make terrible choices. And sometimes the person you trust most will choose the easiest path when the difficult one would require courage. You can't control that. You can only control how you respond. My revenge didn't give me back the 8 years. It didn't erase the stress. It didn't undo the nights I spent wondering whether I would have to start over. It didn't prevent innocent employees from being hurt when Mercer went through restructuring. It didn't make everything fair, but it did something I needed. It put the truth back where the lie had been. And once that happened, I was free to leave. The last time I heard the name Richard Wade, it wasn't because someone sent me an update. It was because a former Mercer employee mentioned him at a conference and then immediately said, "Sorry, I shouldn't bring that up." I laughed. "You don't have to apologize." He looked surprised. "You really don't care anymore?" I thought about it. Not really. That was the truth. I didn't care whether Richard regretted it. I didn't care whether he blamed Colin. I didn't care whether he told himself he had been protecting the company. I didn't care whether he thought I had won. Those things belonged to him. My life belonged to me, and that, more than anything else, was the part they had failed to understand. They thought taking my job meant taking my future. They thought damaging my reputation meant controlling where I could go next. They thought the company was the source of my value. They were wrong. The company had been one place where I learned what I was capable of. It wasn't the owner of that capability. I know some people will read this and think I should have taken the money immediately. Others will think I should have gone public. Some will think I should have forgiven everyone. Some will think I should have fought harder. Maybe they're all right in their own way. I don't know if I made every decision perfectly. I know I made some bad ones. I trusted the wrong people. I ignored warning signs. I waited too long to separate my identity from my job. I probably spent more emotional energy on Mercer than it deserved. But I also know that when I had a chance to become vindictive, I chose evidence. When I had a chance to leak information, I chose the proper channels. When I had a chance to embarrass Evan, I chose not to. When Mike betrayed me, I didn't destroy him. When Richard tried to buy silence, I asked for the record to be corrected instead. And when the truth finally became bigger than my personal case, I stepped back and let other people decide what consequences were appropriate. That's the closest thing to revenge I can live with. Because the people who tried to destroy me ended up having to answer questions they couldn't control. Not questions I invented, questions their own decisions created. Why was my position being transitioned before the alleged misconduct? Why was my access being monitored before anyone accused me of anything? Why did the security evidence identify a user account rather than a person? Why did the compliance reviewer say the evidence was inconclusive? Why was a different conclusion later presented as fact? Why was Evan asked to certify operational capacity before the underlying adjustments had been validated? Why did the financial model improve while the operational reality stayed the same? Why did the company's internal explanation change? Why did the outside party start asking the same questions independently? Those questions were the revenge. I just kept them alive long enough for the right people to ask them too. And maybe that's why, years later, I can finally say, I don't regret what happened. I regret the pain. I regret the people who got hurt. I regret the time I lost. I regret how long it took me to trust my own judgment again. But I don't regret becoming someone who knows the difference between being loyal and being naive. I don't regret learning that a clean record matters more than a clean story. I don't regret leaving Mercer behind, and I definitely don't regret refusing to let a false accusation become the final sentence of my career. The company thought the day they fired me was the day they removed a problem. They were right about one thing: I was a problem, just not for the reason they thought. I was a problem because I remembered what the numbers had been before they changed. I remembered which promises had been made before the contracts were signed. I remembered who had been in the room when the assumptions were questioned. I remembered the dates. I remembered the conversations. And when they tried to make me forget my own history, I wrote it down. That's all I did. I wrote it down, I kept the records, and I waited. Eventually, their story couldn't survive its own timeline. And when the last correction arrived and my employment record finally said what should have been written there from the beginning, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Then I closed my laptop, went downstairs, ordered dinner, and went home to the life I'd built after them. For the first time in years, I didn't look back.